Today, you're in for 50 horror stories so chilling, so utterly bone-rattling, they'll have you gripping the covers tightly around you all night long. For newcomers, we publish a new video on our channel every day. Subscribe to our channel and you'll get new spine-tingling stories daily. And now, we begin. The Johnson family had always dreamed of owning a charming Victorian home, and their wish finally came true when they purchased a beautiful old house on Elm Street. Excitement filled their hearts as they moved in and began to make the house their own. However, their joy soon turned to fear as they began to hear strange whispers coming from the walls. At first, they brushed off the whispers as their imagination playing tricks on them. But as the days passed, the messages became clearer, more sinister. The walls seemed to be speaking directly to them, warning of impending doom and cryptic messages that chilled them to the bone. Sarah Johnson, a strong-willed mother of two, tried to ignore the whispers, but they continued to torment her day and night. She confided in her husband, John, who dismissed her fears as mere superstition. However, as the whispers grew louder and more insistent, even he could not deny that something was terribly wrong. Night after night, Sarah lay awake, listening to the walls speak of death, darkness, and despair. She became convinced that the house was haunted by a malevolent spirit, seeking to harm her family. John, a rational man, tried to reassure her that there must be a logical explanation for the eerie phenomenon. But Sarah knew in her heart that the whispers were real, and they were growing stronger with each passing day. She began to investigate the history of the house, uncovering a dark and tragic past that seemed to confirm her worst fears. The previous owners had met untimely ends, their deaths shrouded in mystery and suspicion. As Sarah delved deeper into the house's secrets, she discovered a hidden room in the attic, filled with old journals and letters detailing the tragic events that had taken place within those walls. The whispers became more frantic, more urgent, warning her to leave before it was too late. But Sarah was determined to uncover the truth, to put an end to the haunting once and for all. She enlisted the help of a renowned paranormal investigator who confirmed her suspicions that the house was indeed haunted by a restless spirit seeking retribution. Together, they performed a cleansing ritual, banishing the malevolent presence from the house. As the last whispers faded away, Sarah and her family felt a sense of peace and relief wash over them. The house was finally silent, the walls no longer whispering their dark secrets. But as they settled back into their normal lives, a nagging doubt lingered in Sarah's mind. Had they truly banished the spirit, or had they merely silenced it for a time? Only time would tell if the whispers would return, haunting them once more in the dead of night. But for now, they could finally sleep soundly, the walls of their once haunted home silent at last. As the masquerade ball glittered with opulence and glamour, Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. A sense of unease washed over her as she caught sight of a figure in the crowd who bore an uncanny resemblance to herself. The mask that concealed the stranger's identity only added to the sense of foreboding that gripped Eleanor's heart. Unable to shake off the feeling of dread, Eleanor found herself drawn towards the mysterious doppelganger. As she moved closer, she could see the subtle differences that set them apart, the angle of the jaw, the curve of the lips, and yet the resemblance was strikingly eerie. Their eyes met through the elaborate masks, and a shiver ran down Eleanor's spine as she felt a surge of recognition that bordered on the surreal. The doppelganger beckoned to her with a gloved hand, and before she could stop herself, Eleanor found herself following the stranger into a secluded alcove. The air grew heavy with tension as the doppelganger removed their mask, revealing a face that mirrored Eleanor's own in every detail. Panic clawed at Eleanor's throat as she realized that this was not a mere coincidence, this was something far darker, far more sinister. Words tumbled from the doppelganger's lips in a chilling whisper, each syllable echoing with a sense of impending doom. I am you, Eleanor. I am the darkness that lurks within you, the shadow that you dare not acknowledge. I have come to claim what is rightfully mine. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of the surreal nightmare unfolding before her. Was this a trick of the mind, a figment of her imagination brought on by the opulent surroundings of the masquerade ball? Or was this doppelganger something more, something that defied rational explanation? As the doppelganger reached out a hand towards her, Eleanor stumbled backwards, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She knew then, with a chilling certainty, that she was facing a force beyond her understanding, a manifestation of her deepest fears and darkest desires. The doppelganger's eyes gleamed with a malevolent light as they spoke once more, their voice dripping with malice. "Dance with me, Eleanor. Dance the dance of the doppelganger, and let the shadows claim you as their own." With a sense of resignation, Eleanor took the doppelganger's outstretched hand, feeling the chill of their touch seep into her very soul. And as they began to move in a macabre dance that mirrored the twisted depths of her own psyche, Eleanor knew that she had been lured into a nightmare from which there was no escape. Nestled at the end of a quiet street, shrouded in shadow and mystery, stood the home of an eccentric recluse known only as the Bone Collector. His macabre collection of human bones was the stuff of local legend, whispered about in hushed tones by those brave enough to venture near. For years, the townspeople had speculated about the origins of the bones that lined the shelves and adorned the walls of the collector's abode. Some said they were the remains of long-forgotten victims, while others claimed they were merely the remnants of medical oddities procured from the black market. One fateful night, a young journalist by the name of Emily dared to knock on the Bone Collector's door, determined to uncover the truth behind the enigmatic figure. The door creaked open, revealing a dark figure shrouded in shadows, his eyes gleaming with a sinister light. Emily was taken aback by the collector's eerie presence, but pushed forward, demanding answers to the questions that haunted her dreams. With a crooked smile, the collector invited her inside, leading her through a maze of dimly lit corridors and twisted passageways. As they approached the heart of the collector's lair, Emily's heart quickened with anticipation and fear. The walls seemed to whisper to her, their voices a cacophony of secrets and lies. She could feel the weight of the bones staring down at her, their hollow sockets filled with malevolent intent. The collector finally turned to Emily, his voice a low, menacing growl. "You want to know the truth, do you?" he hissed, his fingers tracing the curves of a human skull. "Every bone in this collection tells a story, a tale of darkness and despair." With a sudden burst of courage, Emily demanded to know the collector's own story, the reason behind his twisted obsession. A shadow passed over the collector's face, his eyes glinting with madness as he revealed the horrifying truth. "I am but a vessel for their restless spirits," he whispered, his breath hot against her neck. "Each bone you see before you belonged to a victim of my insatiable hunger for knowledge. Their souls now reside within me, guiding my every move." As the truth dawned on Emily, the collector's lair began to shift and morph, the walls closing in around her in a suffocating embrace. She knew then that she was trapped, bound to this cursed place for eternity. In the darkness, the bones whispered their dreadful chorus, a never-ending symphony of anguish and lament. And as Emily's screams echoed through the night, the Bone Collector smiled, his collection growing ever larger with each passing soul. As the sun began to set on the small town of Willow Creek, a sense of unease settled over the residents. It was said that when the melody of the cursed music box drifted through the streets, tragedy was sure to follow. Evelyn Young had always been drawn to the antique music box that sat on a dusty shelf in the corner of her grandmother's attic. Its intricate carvings and delicate melody called to her in a way she couldn't explain. When her grandmother passed away and Evelyn inherited the music box, she couldn't resist the temptation to wind it up and listen to its haunting tune. But as the melody filled the room, a chill ran down Evelyn's spine. The once beautiful notes began to twist and warp into something dark and sinister. Images of blood and chaos flashed before her eyes, and a feeling of dread settled in the pit of her stomach. Night after night, Evelyn would wake up in a cold sweat, the echoes of the cursed melody ringing in her ears. She tried to ignore it, to chalk it up to an overactive imagination, but the music box's hold on her only grew stronger. As the days turned into weeks, Evelyn's thoughts became consumed by the music box. She found herself drawn to it, unable to resist its siren call. The once vibrant young woman began to waste away, her pale skin and haunted eyes a stark contrast to the lively girl she once was. Friends and family began to grow concerned, but Evelyn pushed them away, lost in a world of her own making. She began to hear whispers in the darkness, voices that whispered terrible things and urged her to do unspeakable acts. One fateful night, as the cursed melody reached a fever pitch, Evelyn couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed the music box and fled into the night, the voices in her head driving her to the edge of sanity. As the townspeople awoke to the sounds of screams and chaos, they found Evelyn standing on the edge of a cliff, the cursed music box clutched tightly in her hands. With one final, desperate gesture, she hurled the music box into the darkness below. And as the music box shattered on the rocks below, the curse was broken. The whispers faded into nothingness, and Evelyn Young was never seen or heard from again. But to this day, the people of Willow Creek swear they can still hear the echoes of the cursed melody drifting through the streets, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks within us all. As the sun began to dip beneath the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty streets, Marcus found himself standing before the antique mirror that hung in his bedroom. A mirror that had been a fixture in the house long before he had even been born. But tonight, something was different. As Marcus gazed into his reflection, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off. His reflection seemed to move independently of his own actions, almost as if it had a life of its own. He blinked, trying to shake off the unease that was settling in the pit of his stomach. But then it happened. His reflection reached out a hand and beckoned to him, a sinister smile playing on its lips. Marcus stumbled backward, his heart pounding in his chest. This was impossible. Mirrors didn't move on their own. It had to be a trick of the light, a figment of his imagination. But as he watched in horror, his reflection continued to move, to dance and twist in ways that were unnatural. And then, with a jolt, it stepped out of the mirror and stood before him, its eyes filled with malice. Who are you?" Marcus stammered, backing away from the apparition before him. "I am you," the reflection whispered, its voice cold and devoid of emotion. "I am the part of you that you deny, that you suppress. I am the darkness that lurks within your soul." Marcus shook his head, trying to make sense of what was happening. This had to be a nightmare. A twisted, terrifying nightmare. But as the reflection advanced towards him, its hand outstretched as if to claim him, Marcus knew that this was all too real. And he had no choice but to face the darkness that had been lurking within him all along. As the night descended into chaos, Marcus found himself locked in a battle for his very sanity. The reflection taunted him, twisted his reality, and forced him to confront the darkest corners of his mind. Memories long buried, fears long ignored, all came flooding back with a ferocity that threatened to consume him whole. But as the first light of dawn broke through the curtains, Marcus stood before the mirror once more. Only this time, there was no sinister smile, no taunting gaze. Only his own reflection, staring back at him with a familiarity that sent shivers down his spine. And as he turned away from the mirror, the events of the night still fresh in his mind, Marcus knew that he would never be the same again. The man in the mirror had shown him his true self, and it was a revelation that would haunt him for the rest of his days. As the crimson moon rose above the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the town, the arrival of the traveling carnival seemed like a harbinger of dark times to come. The air was thick with an ominous energy, and whispers of unexplainable disappearances and grotesque transformations spread like wildfire through the community. Curiosity mingled with fear as the townspeople flocked to the carnival grounds, drawn by the promise of otherworldly wonders and heart-pounding thrills. The air was heavy with the scent of fried food and sugary treats, but underneath it all, there was a sense of foreboding that lingered like a shadow. As the night wore on, the attractions seemed to take on a sinister edge. The rides creaked and groaned as they whirled through the dark, their flashing lights casting eerie shadows. The games of skill and chance took on a macabre twist, with prizes that seemed to be more cursed than coveted. But it was the performers that truly sent a chill down the spines of those brave enough to watch their acts. The contortionist twisted her body into impossible shapes, her limbs bending in ways that seemed to defy the laws of anatomy. The fire eater swallowed flames that danced and flickered like malevolent spirits within her throat. And the clown, with his painted smile frozen in a rictus grin, seemed to watch the crowd with eyes that gleamed with an otherworldly intelligence. As the night grew darker, a sense of unease settled over the carnival like a shroud. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, and the whispers more urgent. People began to vanish without a trace, leaving behind only a trail of fear and suspicion in their wake. It soon became clear that the carnival was not what it seemed. Beneath the guise of entertainment lurked a malevolent force, hungry for souls and willing to do whatever it took to satisfy its dark desires. The blood moon cast a crimson glow over the carnival grounds, illuminating the true nature of the night's terrors. For those who survived that fateful night, the memories would haunt them for the rest of their days. The Blood Moon Carnival became a legend, whispered about in hushed tones by those who dared to speak of it at all. And the souls of the lost were said to linger on, trapped within the twisted halls of the carnival's dark heart, forever cursed to roam the shadowed grounds under the watchful gaze of the blood moon. As the sun began to set on the quiet town of Ravenwood, a sense of unease settled over the residents. The arrival of the new widow, Mrs. Thompson, and her young daughter, Emily, had stirred up whispers of the tragic events that had taken place in their secluded home. The abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town had long been rumored to be cursed, its former owner, the renowned doll maker, Matthias Blackwood, meeting a mysterious and untimely demise. Mrs. Thompson was a woman consumed by grief, her once vibrant spirit now shrouded in a veil of darkness. The only solace she found was in the lifelike porcelain doll that she carried with her at all times, a haunting reminder of her lost daughter, Annabelle. The doll's icy gaze seemed to follow anyone who dared to look upon it, sending shivers down the spine of those who crossed its path. As the days passed, strange occurrences began to plague the town. Whispers of a cursed doll that brought misfortune to all who gazed upon it spread like wildfire, casting a shadow of fear over Ravenwood. The once peaceful streets now echoed with the sound of hushed conversations and fearful glances. Emily, the young daughter of Mrs. Thompson, seemed to be the only one unaffected by the growing sense of dread. She spent hours playing with the porcelain doll, oblivious to the unease it wrought upon the townspeople. But as the days turned to weeks, a change began to take hold of Emily. Her laughter grew hollow, her eyes distant, as if she was slowly being consumed by the darkness that surrounded her. One fateful night, a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence of the town, drawing the residents to the Thompson mansion. What they discovered sent chills down their spines. Mrs. Thompson lay lifeless on the floor, the porcelain doll clutched in her cold, lifeless hands. The doll's once delicate features contorted into a sinister grin, its glass eyes gleaming with malevolence. As the townspeople whispered of curses and dark magic, Emily sat alone in her room, the doll perched on her lap. Her eyes held a vacant stare as the whispers of the doll echoed through her mind, twisting her thoughts and filling her with a sense of dread. The once innocent child had become a vessel for the doll's malevolent spirit, its curse consuming her from within. And as the sun rose over Ravenwood, a sense of foreboding settled over the quiet town. The legacy of the doll-maker's curse lived on, its haunting presence forever etched into the souls of those who dared to uncover the truth behind the porcelain doll's curse. As the sun began to set, casting eerie shadows across the dense trees of the whispering woods, a sense of unease settled over the group of hikers. They had ventured into the forest in search of adventure, but now they found themselves lost in a labyrinth of towering trees that seemed to whisper ancient secrets to them. Jenna, the group's leader, tried to keep her composure as the whispers grew louder, their words twisting and turning in her mind like tendrils of darkness. She urged her friends to stay calm, but the fear in their eyes mirrored her own growing dread. As they pressed on, the trees seemed to loom closer, their branches reaching out as if to ensnare the hapless travelers. Jenna's heart raced as she realized that they were not alone in the woods. Something malevolent lurked in the shadows, watching and waiting. Suddenly, a clearing appeared in the distance, and the group rushed towards it, desperate to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the forest. But as they stepped into the open space, they saw with horror that they had stumbled upon a forgotten burial ground, the ancient gravestones standing like sentinels in the fading light. The whispers around them grew louder, the words more insistent and chilling. Jenna felt a cold sweat break out on her skin as she realized that the spirits of the dead were trying to communicate with them, their voices a cacophony of despair and longing. As the group huddled together, the air around them seemed to thicken, suffocating them with its malevolent energy. Jenna knew that they were in grave danger, but she also knew that they could not escape the forest until they had unraveled its dark secrets. With a trembling hand, Jenna reached out to touch one of the gravestones, the ancient stone cold beneath her fingers. And then, as if in a trance, she began to speak the words that had been whispered to her, her voice carrying the sorrow and anguish of the long-dead souls. As she spoke, a sense of peace descended upon the woods, the whispers fading into the distance. The group felt a weight lift from their shoulders, a sense of resolution filling the clearing. As they slowly made their way out of the whispering woods, Jenna knew that they had faced a darkness unlike any they had experienced before. But she also knew that they had emerged stronger, their bond forged by the shared ordeal in the heart of the haunted forest. And as they left the woods behind, the whispers faded into the night, their secrets buried once more in the depths of the ancient trees. As the elevator doors slid shut, Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of unease wash over her. The office building seemed deserted, the only sound the soft humming of the elevator as it ascended to the 7th floor. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that something sinister lurked in the shadows of the building. When the elevator came to a stop and the doors opened, Sarah stepped out into a dimly lit hallway. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, the air thick with the scent of decay. As she walked down the corridor, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that unseen eyes followed her every move. As she reached the end of the hallway, she came upon a door that seemed to pulsate with an unnatural energy. The handle was cold to the touch, sending shivers down her spine as she turned it and pushed the door open. What she found inside was a room that defied all logic and reason. The walls were lined with mirrors, reflecting her image back at her in a dizzying array of angles. But it wasn't her reflection that caused her blood to run cold, it was the figures that stood behind her in the mirrors, twisted in grotesque versions of herself. As she stumbled back in horror, the mirrors began to warp and shift, the figures reaching out towards her with twisted smiles on their faces. She tried to scream, but no sound came out as she was pulled into the mirrors, into a nightmarish world of her own making. As she struggled to make sense of the twisted reality that surrounded her, she realized that she was trapped in her own mind, her deepest fears and insecurities manifesting themselves in the mirrors that surrounded her. She was faced with versions of herself that she had long buried, forced to confront the darkness that lurked within her soul. As she fought to break free from the mirrors, she could feel herself being pulled deeper and deeper into the abyss. The figures that surrounded her whispered in hushed tones, their words driving her to the brink of madness. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Sarah found herself back in the dimly lit hallway, the door to the room nowhere to be seen. She stumbled out of the building, shaken to her core by the experience she had just endured. But as she looked back at the building, she could have sworn she saw a figure standing in the window of the 7th floor, watching her with eyes that glinted with malevolence. And she knew, deep down, that the nightmare was far from over. Once upon a time in a small town, there was an insomniac named Sarah who struggled to find peace in her dreams. Night after night, she tossed and turned, unable to escape the prison of her own mind. However, one fateful evening, Sarah stumbled upon an underground network that promised to help her enter and manipulate the dreams of others. Intrigued by the possibilities, Sarah delved deeper into the world of the Nightmare Network. She learned how to navigate the dreams of strangers, bending their realities to her will. At first, it was exhilarating to have such power over others' subconscious minds. But soon, Sarah began to realize the dark consequences of her actions. As Sarah delved deeper into the dreams of others, she discovered a malevolent force lurking within the network. Shadows whispered dark secrets to her, urging her to delve further into the depths of the dream world. Sarah's own nightmares began to merge with those of her unwitting targets, blurring the lines between reality and illusion. Haunted by the sinister presence within the Nightmare Network, Sarah found herself trapped in a twisted game of psychological warfare. The dreams she entered became increasingly nightmarish, with her own fears manifesting in grotesque and terrifying ways. She soon realized that the network was not a tool for empowerment, but a prison of her own making. As Sarah struggled to break free from the grip of the Nightmare Network, she discovered that the malevolent force at its core fed on the fear and despair of its users. It sought to consume her soul, trapping her in an endless cycle of torment and despair. Desperate to escape, Sarah had to confront her own inner demons and find the strength to resist the darkness that threatened to engulf her. In a final, desperate act of defiance, Sarah made the ultimate sacrifice to sever her ties to the Nightmare Network. With a newfound sense of clarity, she awoke from the dreamscape, determined to reclaim control of her own mind and find solace in the waking world. And so, Sarah emerged from the shadows of her own subconscious, forever changed by her harrowing journey through the twisted labyrinth of the Nightmare Network. The echoes of her ordeal lingered in the depths of her psyche, a reminder of the dangers that lurked within the realm of dreams. Yet, she was determined to move forward, armed with the knowledge that true power lies not in manipulating others, but in confronting and overcoming one's own deepest fears. On a lonely country road, shrouded in darkness and fog, there appeared a mysterious figure holding a lantern. His face obscured by the shadows, he stood motionless, the light of the lantern casting an eerie glow around him. Those who passed by felt an inexplicable sense of unease, a creeping feeling that something was not quite right. As the days went by, more and more travelers reported sightings of the Lantern Man. Some claimed to have heard whispers in the night, beckoning them to follow the light of his lantern. Others spoke of a strange compulsion to approach him, to seek out the source of the mysterious figure that haunted their dreams. One young couple, driving home from a late-night party, encountered the Lantern Man on a foggy night. The woman, mesmerized by the flickering light, begged her boyfriend to pull over and investigate. Against his better judgment, he obeyed her wishes, parking the car on the side of the road and stepping out into the darkness. As they approached the Lantern Man, the man felt a chill run down his spine. The woman, however, seemed strangely calm, drawn to the figure as if under some dark spell. Without a word, she reached out to touch the lantern, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. In that instant, the Lantern Man's light flickered and dimmed, casting the couple into pitch-black darkness. They screamed in terror, their voices echoing through the night as they searched blindly for each other. But when the light returned, they were no longer alone. The Lantern Man stood before them, his features finally revealed in the dim light. His face was twisted and grotesque, a grotesque mask of pain and anguish. And as he reached out to them with gnarled hands, they realized the truth too late. The Lantern Man was no mere illusion, but a harbinger of doom, a collector of lost souls doomed to wander the lonely country roads forever. The couple's screams echoed through the night, mingling with the whispers of the Lantern Man as he beckoned them into the darkness. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the Lantern Man disappeared, leaving behind only a lingering sense of dread and the memory of those who had dared to follow him into the night. The winds whispered ominously through the coastal town as the widowed fisherman, Henry, sat alone on the rocky cliffs. His thoughts were consumed by the haunting melody that had been echoing in his mind since he first heard it weeks ago. The siren song, as the locals called it, had a mesmerizing quality that beckoned him closer to the crashing waves below. Night after night, Henry found himself drawn to the edge of the sea, unable to resist the haunting call of the mysterious singer. His once sturdy resolve began to crumble as the melody wormed its way deeper into his soul, stirring up a mix of desire and dread within him. Days turned into weeks, and Henry's obsession with the siren's song grew more intense. His fellow fishermen whispered of curses and legends surrounding the mysterious singer, warning him to stay away. But Henry could not tear himself away from the pull of the beautiful, yet chilling music that called out to him in the dead of night. One moonless evening, Henry decided to confront the source of the haunting melody. He set out in his small fishing boat, guided only by the ethereal sound that seemed to lead him further out to sea. The air grew colder, the waters darker, as Henry ventured into unknown territory, his heart pounding in his chest with a mix of fear and exhilaration. As the siren's song grew louder, Henry's boat came to a sudden stop, caught in a thick fog that obscured his vision. He strained his eyes to see through the mist, and there, on a distant rock formation, he saw her. The siren, with her long flowing hair and piercing eyes, sang her enchanting melody that seemed to pierce through Henry's very being. Unable to resist any longer, Henry leapt from his boat and swam towards the siren, heedless of the danger that surrounded him. As he drew closer, he realized too late the true nature of the mysterious singer. Her beautiful facade melted away, revealing a twisted visage of decay and malice, her melody now a cacophony of screams and laughter that chilled him to the bone. Henry's last moments were filled with terror and regret as the siren's song led him to his watery grave, his body lost to the depths of the unforgiving sea. The coastal town mourned the loss of the once proud fisherman, but the haunting melody of the siren's song continued to echo through the cliffs, a warning to all who dared to listen to the call of the unknown. The legend of the siren's curse lived on, a cautionary tale of the dangers that lurked beneath the surface of the tranquil waters. Deep within the dark, winding corridors of the construction site, workers toiled tirelessly to excavate the ancient burial ground that lay dormant for centuries. As the first glimmers of dawn pierced the thick veil of night, the foreman, Jack, let out a heavy sigh, his breath visible in the chilly morning air. The crew had been working day and night to unearth the mysterious burial site, driven by a mixture of curiosity and unease. Whispers of curses and malevolent spirits had circulated among the workers, but Jack had dismissed them as mere superstitions. Yet, as the excavation progressed, a sense of unease settled over the site like a thick fog, clinging to the minds of all who dared to venture into the depths of the unearthed earth. One night, as the crew prepared to call it a day, a young worker named Mike stumbled upon a hidden chamber buried deep within the earth. The air grew heavy and oppressive as he entered the chamber, the walls lined with ancient hieroglyphics that seemed to writhe and twist in the dim light of his headlamp. Ignoring the warnings of his companions, Mike pressed on, his heart pounding in his chest with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. As he reached the center of the chamber, a sense of dread washed over him like a tidal wave. A solitary coffin, adorned with intricate carvings and symbols, lay at the center of the room, its lid sealed shut with heavy chains. With trembling hands, Mike reached out and touched the cold, weathered surface of the coffin, his fingers tracing the faded runes that adorned its surface. Suddenly, a deafening silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the sound of Mike's ragged breathing. In a moment of reckless impulse, he grasped the chains that bound the coffin and pulled with all his might, the metal groaning in protest as it gave way. With a violent crash, the lid of the coffin swung open, revealing a sight that would haunt Mike for the rest of his days. A withered figure, wrapped in decaying robes and adorned with ancient symbols, lay motionless within the coffin, its eyes fixed on him with a malevolent glare. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, the figure stirred, its gaze locking onto Mike with a hunger that sent shivers down his spine. With a blood-curdling scream, Mike turned and fled from the chamber, the echoes of his footsteps reverberating through the corridors of the construction site. As he bolted towards the exit, a cacophony of unearthly wails and screams filled the air, echoing off the walls and sending chills down his spine. From that day on, the construction site lay abandoned, a dark shadow hanging over it like a shroud. The workers spoke in hushed tones of the buried secret that lay within the earth, a secret that would forever haunt their dreams and cast a pall over their souls. And as the sun set on the site, a lone figure could be seen moving among the shadows, its eyes gleaming with a hunger that could never be sated. In the small town of Millfield, a disturbing discovery was made at the local cemetery. A fresh grave had been dug and a headstone erected, bearing the name Ezra Thorne. The problem was, Ezra Thorne was very much alive. At first, Ezra tried to dismiss the grave as a sick prank. After all, who would go to such lengths to unsettle him? But as the days passed, strange occurrences began to plague his life. He would receive condolence cards from friends and acquaintances, expressing their sympathies for his untimely demise. Flowers would appear on his doorstep, with notes addressed to the family of Ezra Thorne. Ezra's unease grew into full-blown paranoia. He became convinced that someone, or something, was trying to kill him. He refused to leave his house, jumping at every creak and shadow. His girlfriend, Sadie, tried to reassure him, telling him that it was all just a misunderstanding. But even she couldn't deny the eerie coincidences that seemed to be piling up. Desperate for answers, Ezra turned to the one person he thought might be able to help, a local historian named Dr. Amelia Hartwell. Dr. Hartwell had a reputation for unearthing the town's darkest secrets, and Ezra hoped that she might be able to shed some light on the mystery of his own premature grave. As Dr. Hartwell began to investigate, she discovered a chilling pattern. Every few decades, a grave would appear in the Millfield Cemetery, bearing the name of someone who was still alive. And within a few weeks of the grave's appearance, that person would die under mysterious circumstances. Dr. Hartwell became convinced that the graves were not a coincidence, but a curse. She theorized that someone, or something, was using the graves as a way to mark its victims, to foretell their impending doom. And now, it seemed, Ezra Thorne was next on the list. Ezra's fear turned to outright terror. He became convinced that his every move was being watched, that the curse was closing in on him. He pushed Sadie away, convinced that being near him would only put her in danger. He retreated into his house, shutting out the world and waiting for the inevitable. But Dr. Hartwell refused to give up. She pored over old records and documents, searching for any clue that might help her break the curse. And then, just as all hope seemed lost, she stumbled upon a lead. She discovered that the curse could be traced back to a vengeful spirit, a woman who had been wronged in life and now sought to punish the living from beyond the grave. The only way to break the curse was to confront the spirit, to offer her the justice she had been denied in life. Armed with this knowledge, Dr. Hartwell and Sadie raced to the cemetery, determined to save Ezra before it was too late. But when they arrived, they found Ezra's lifeless body lying atop his own grave, his face frozen in a mask of terror. Sadie collapsed to the ground, overcome with grief. But Dr. Hartwell knew that there was still one last chance to set things right. She performed the ritual to summon the vengeful spirit, offering her the apology and recognition she had been denied in life. For a moment, it seemed as though the spirit would not be appeased. The air grew cold, and the ground began to tremble beneath their feet. But then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the spirit vanished, and the curse was lifted. In the years that followed, the legend of the cursed graves faded into memory. But for those who knew the truth, the scars left by the vengeful spirit would never truly heal. And sometimes, when the mist rolled in and the shadows grew long, they could still hear the whispered echoes of Ezra Thorne's final, terrified screams. As the full moon cast an eerie glow over the abandoned mansion, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled deep in her bones. She had been drawn to the dilapidated building by rumors of a haunted paintbrush that had the power to bring nightmares to life. Ignoring the warning signs, she stepped inside, her footsteps echoing through the empty hallways. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay, sending a shiver down Emily's spine. She made her way to the attic, where the paintbrush was said to be hidden. As she reached out to touch it, a sudden chill ran through her, causing her hand to tremble. Without warning, the walls around her began to whisper, their voices filled with malice and secrets long buried. Emily tried to ignore them, but their words clawed at her mind, tempting her to uncover the dark power of the paintbrush. With a trembling hand, she dipped the brush into a pot of black paint and began to create. As the strokes of her brush danced across the canvas, twisted images began to take shape, each more grotesque than the last. The room filled with a sinister energy, and Emily felt as though she were being watched by unseen eyes. As the final stroke fell, a figure emerged from the painting, its eyes filled with a malevolent glint. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as the figure stepped out of the canvas and into the room, its movements fluid and ghostly. Trapped in a nightmare of her own creation, Emily tried to run, but the figure reached out a hand and beckoned her closer. Her mind was clouded with fear, her thoughts spiraling into darkness as the figure whispered dark promises of power and madness. With a trembling breath, Emily took a step towards the figure, her fate sealed by the cursed paintbrush. As the moonlight bathed the room in a ghostly glow, the figure enveloped her in its embrace, pulling her into a world of twisted nightmares and endless torment. And as the whispers of the walls echoed through the empty mansion, a new painting appeared on the wall, a twisted reflection of Emily's fate, trapped in a never-ending nightmare, her soul forever bound to the cursed paintbrush. Nestled in a small coastal town, the mist rolled in like a sinister shroud, enveloping everything it touched in a murky haze. Residents quickly learned to fear the mist, as it had strange and unsettling effects on those who ventured too close. It whispered to their minds, weaving dark illusions and beckoning them to succumb to their innermost fears and deepest impulses. One fateful night, a young woman named Emily found herself lost in the thick mist as she wandered along the deserted streets. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she felt a chill creep down her spine, the whispers of the mist growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. She tried to flee, but the mist seemed to follow her, trapping her in its grasp. As Emily stumbled through the mist, she began to see shadowy figures lurking in the fog, their eyes filled with malice and hunger. The whispers grew louder, taunting her with her greatest fears and insecurities, tearing at her psyche with each passing moment. She felt herself losing control, her mind slipping further and further into the depths of madness. Desperate to escape the clutches of the mist, Emily blindly ran towards the town's abandoned lighthouse, hoping to find sanctuary within its ancient walls. But as she approached, the mist thickened around her, forming a barrier that prevented her from reaching safety. The whispers grew louder and more twisted, filling her mind with nightmarish visions that threatened to consume her soul. With a final burst of courage, Emily forced herself to confront her deepest fears and inner demons. She stared into the heart of the mist, refusing to let it break her spirit. And in that moment of defiance, the mist began to dissipate, its hold over her weakening with each passing second. As the mist cleared, Emily stumbled out of the fog, shaken but alive. She looked back at the dissipating mist, knowing that she had faced her darkest fears and emerged stronger for it. The town was quiet once more, the whispers of the mist fading into the night. But as Emily walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that the mist of madness would always linger in the shadows, waiting to ensnare unwary souls and drive them to the brink of insanity. And she knew that she would forever carry the memory of that harrowing night, a chilling reminder of the fragility of the human mind in the face of darkness. When the Donovan family moved into their new home, they thought they had found their dream house. It was a beautiful, spacious property with plenty of room for their 3 children to grow and play. But as they settled in, they began to notice strange things about the house. It started with small, seemingly insignificant details. Doors would slam shut on their own, lights would flicker and dim without explanation. But as the weeks passed, the occurrences became more disturbing. The children would wake up screaming in the night, claiming to have seen shadowy figures standing over their beds. Strange, unsettling noises would echo through the halls, like the sound of footsteps or whispered voices. One day, while exploring the attic, the eldest child, Liam, stumbled upon a hidden room. It was small and dark, tucked away behind a false wall. Inside, he found a collection of old, dusty books and journals. Intrigued, Liam began to read through them, hoping to find some clue about the history of the house. What he discovered chilled him to the bone. The journals belonged to the previous owner of the house, a man named Ezra Blackwood. Ezra had been a troubled soul, plagued by dark, twisted thoughts and desires. He wrote about the voices in his head, urging him to do unspeakable things. He described strange, occult rituals he had performed in the hidden room, trying to summon something from beyond the veil. As Liam delved deeper into Ezra's writings, he began to notice disturbing parallels between the man's descent into madness and the strange occurrences in the house. He became convinced that Ezra's spirit was still present, lingering in the hidden room and influencing the family. Liam tried to warn his parents about his discovery, but they dismissed his concerns as the overactive imagination of a child. They couldn't see the darkness that was slowly seeping into their lives, the insidious influence of Ezra's twisted soul. As the weeks passed, the family began to unravel. The children became sullen and withdrawn, their eyes haunted by the horrors they had witnessed. The parents argued constantly, their tempers fraying under the constant strain of living in the house. And always, the hidden room seemed to beckon, drawing them in with its dark, seductive power. Finally, Liam knew he had to take matters into his own hands. He gathered his courage and ventured into the hidden room one last time, determined to confront Ezra's spirit and banish it from the house. But as he stepped over the threshold, he felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. The room was different now, the walls pulsing with a sickly, otherworldly light. And there, in the center of the room, stood Ezra himself, his eyes blazing with madness and malice. Liam tried to fight, but he was no match for the spirit's power. Ezra seized control of his mind, twisting his thoughts and desires until Liam was no longer sure where his own ended and Ezra's began. He became a prisoner in his own body, forced to watch as Ezra used him to carry out his dark, twisted plans. In the end, it was Liam's younger sister, Avery, who saved the family. She had always been sensitive to the supernatural, and she could sense the darkness that had taken hold of her brother. With the help of a local medium, she was able to banish Ezra's spirit and free Liam from his control. But the experience left scars on the Donovan family that would never fully heal. They moved out of the house, hoping to put the nightmare behind them. But sometimes, in the dark of night, they would swear they could still hear Ezra's voice, whispering to them from the shadows. Years later, Liam would return to the house, drawn back by a morbid curiosity. He found the hidden room exactly as he remembered it. And there, on the dusty floor, he found a final, chilling message scrawled in Ezra's spidery handwriting: "You can never truly escape me. I am a part of you now, and I will be with you always." Evelyn had always been fascinated by her great-grandmother's antique dolls. Each one was meticulously crafted with lifelike features and intricate details that seemed to come alive in the dimly lit room. When Evelyn inherited her great-grandmother's estate, she discovered a hidden room filled with dozens of these eerie dolls, their glassy eyes seeming to follow her every move. As Evelyn spent more time with the dolls, she began to notice strange occurrences in the house. Objects would move on their own, whispers echoed through the halls at night, and a feeling of unease settled in the air. One particular doll, a porcelain figure with a painted smile that seemed to widen whenever Evelyn crossed its gaze, held a peculiar allure over her. Unable to resist its unsettling charm, Evelyn found herself spending hours in the hidden room, surrounded by the watchful eyes of the dolls. It was as if they were beckoning her to join their twisted world, where reality blurred and nightmares became reality. The more time Evelyn spent with the dolls, the more she began to lose herself in their eerie presence. One night, as Evelyn sat alone in the dimly lit room, she heard a soft voice whisper in her ear. "Join us," it urged, its tone chilling Evelyn to the core. The room seemed to come alive with a malevolent energy, the doll's eyes glowing in the darkness as if possessed by some unseen force. Terrified yet strangely enticed, Evelyn felt herself drawn to the porcelain doll with the painted smile. Its eyes seemed to bore into her soul, promising a world of darkness and despair. And as Evelyn reached out to touch the doll, a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles and plunging her into complete darkness. When the lights flickered back on, Evelyn found herself alone in the room, the doll's eyes now empty and lifeless. The porcelain doll with the painted smile lay shattered on the floor, its once haunting gaze now nothing but shards of broken porcelain. In that moment, Evelyn realized the true legacy of the doll maker, a legacy of darkness, obsession, and madness that had consumed her great-grandmother and now threatened to consume her as well. As the whispers faded into the night, Evelyn knew she had to escape the cursed room and leave the dolls behind before they claimed her soul as their own. For in the end, the dolls were not just inanimate objects, but vessels of a malevolent force that would stop at nothing to feed on the spirits of the living. And as Evelyn fled the room, the echoes of the doll's laughter followed her, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked within the doll maker's legacy. Hank Stover couldn't believe his luck when he landed the night security guard gig at Desert Diamond Casino just outside Tucson. The pay and benefits were great for the area, and he'd have the whole graveyard shift pretty much to himself while the gambling floors were closed down between 2 a.m. and 10 a.m. His first couple weeks on the job were pretty uneventful. He'd make his patrol rounds, grab a snack from the employee lounge, maybe catch an old movie on his laptop to pass the remaining hours until day shift arrived. Sure, the place gave off some weird vibes with all the Native American theming and hallway artwork. But the silence and solitude were a nice change of pace from his prior work at the mall. It was on his third week when Hank started noticing things. Strange sounds emanating from the vacant casino following the 2 a.m. lockdown. Faint rhythmic drum beats and guttural chanting, almost like ceremonial music, but distorted and warped in a way that set his nerves on edge. At first he thought it must be some automated native soundtrack piped through the PA system on a loop, but it had an eerie cadence that seemed to change and intensify the closer he roamed towards its source. Then came the shadows which appeared in his peripherals. Dark, hunched silhouettes that clung to walls and slots machine rose as Hank passed through the service corridors and gambling promenades. Mere suggestions of movement which faded back into blank corners whenever he shone his patrol wand upon them, only to rematerialize further along once he looked away. After a few restless nights of this, his unease blossomed into full-blown panic after reviewing the security cam footage. Hank could make out his own nightly patrols captured on the flickering green casino floor cams, but also those same shambling, emaciated ombre keeping pace in the background and just along the fringes of each frame. At first, they were fleeting and indistinct, smoky figures which only seemed to partially exist on this corporeal plane. But each successive traverse, the forms became increasingly defined and emboldened in their remorseless pursuit. Long, talon-tipped limbs trailing from withered torsos with distended rib cages swinging beneath leathery, desiccated flesh. Skulls elongated into muzzle-like visages of protruding obsidian fangs and hollow sockets dripping blackened ichor. By the next weekend, even the sight of those lurching, ambling entities on the CCTV monitors only hinted at supernatural obscenities now manifesting right before his eyes. It started just before his customary break around 5 a.m. At first, just the familiar sensations of being watched from dark recessed corners or stairwells beyond his vision. The droning ululations and woodwind-like trills undulating through the speakers in crescendoing waves, growing louder and more frantic with each pass until Hank could no longer dismiss them as faulty acoustics or figments of an overactive imagination. When the first horrors breached from unseen dimensions right before his eyes, Hank was already paralyzed with adrenaline overload. Hunched, crackling shapes sliding forth from between slot machine rows, a procession of frayed, desiccated biomasses ambling erect on spindly legs, offshoots probing blindly ahead of them in dry clicking rails evocative of insectoid antennae. Epidermis stretched translucent over their skeletal torsos, if one could even classify those elongated rib cages and toothsome air sacs as deriving from anything approximating human anatomy. As for the sunken ebonies comprising their faces, the jagged protrusions surrounding those mewling rictuses could hardly be classified as any known vertebrate mandible array. But Hank wasn't able to ponder the eldritch geometries that comprised the entities much longer before charnel miasmas of foul bodily putrescence overwhelmed his nostrils and bowels. The dozen or so liches swiveled in unnatural unisons towards his location, hawing in an unholy chorus that blended screeching gusts of rancid vapor issuing from their abyssal gullets. Even once he managed to scramble away and trip the emergency alert, Hank knew deep down he'd never find sanctuary on this side again. Not after laying eyes upon the vilest scrivenments of hostile outer dimensions briefly unveiled within that ritualized casino's darkest recesses. For those sinews of the skinwalker's living nightmare had always dwelled within these lands, and those who once walked them epochs before, merely awaiting some foolish enough to finally trespass upon ground forbidden by all divine creation. Once upon a time, in a quaint little town nestled in the rolling hills of the countryside, there lived a struggling writer named Alex. Despite his best efforts, Alex had been facing a severe case of writer's block for months, unable to pen down a single word worth reading. Desperate for inspiration, he decided to visit a local antique shop in search of a unique item that might spark his creativity. As he roamed the dusty aisles of the shop, his eyes fell upon a beautifully crafted antique typewriter sitting on a shelf in the corner. Intrigued by its old-world charm, Alex purchased the typewriter and brought it home with him. Little did he know that this seemingly innocent object would soon become the source of his worst nightmares. That night, as Alex sat down to write on his new typewriter, he was struck by a sudden surge of creativity. Words flowed effortlessly from his fingertips, weaving a dark and twisted tale of a haunted mansion and the tormented spirits that dwelled within its walls. But as the story progressed, Alex began to feel a sense of unease creeping over him. With each passing hour, the line between reality and fiction blurred, and Alex found himself unable to distinguish his own thoughts from those of the characters he had created. Shadows danced at the corners of his vision, whispered voices echoed through the empty rooms of his apartment, and a chilling sense of dread settled in the pit of his stomach. As the days turned into weeks, Alex's once vibrant imagination became increasingly consumed by the darkness of his own creation. The characters he had brought to life on the page seemed to taunt him, their malevolent presence seeping into every corner of his mind. Sleep eluded him, replaced by haunting visions of the haunted mansion and its spectral inhabitants. One night, as Alex sat hunched over his typewriter, lost in a frenzy of writing, he heard a faint whisper emanating from the keys. It was a voice he recognized all too well, the voice of the malevolent entity he had unwittingly unleashed with his words. Panic surged through him as he realized that he was no longer in control of his own narrative. The typewriter became a conduit for the darkness that had taken root in his soul, each keystroke sealing his fate further into the twisted reality he had created. And as the last echoes of his final words faded into the night, Alex knew that he had become a prisoner of his own creation, forever trapped in a world of his own making. In the end, all that remained was the click-clack of the typewriter keys, a haunting reminder of the horrors that lurked within the mind of a writer driven to madness by his own words. And as the sun rose on a new day, the typewriter sat silent, waiting for its next unsuspecting victim to fall prey to its cursed legacy. Sophia had always been a curious and introspective person. She was fascinated by the workings of the human mind and had spent years studying psychology and neuroscience. But it wasn't until she discovered the practice of deep meditation that she felt like she had truly found her calling. At first, Sophia's meditation sessions were peaceful and enlightening. She would sit for hours in silence, focusing on her breath and letting her thoughts drift by like clouds in the sky. She felt a sense of clarity and purpose that she had never experienced before. But as Sophia delved deeper into her practice, something began to change. She started to have visions during her meditations, dark and disturbing images that seemed to come from somewhere deep within her subconscious. At first, she tried to ignore them, dismissing them as mere figments of her imagination. But as the visions became more frequent and more intense, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to them. One day, during a particularly deep meditation, Sophia found herself transported to a strange and terrifying landscape. The ground beneath her feet was black and oily, and the sky above was a sickly shade of green. In the distance, she could see twisted, misshapen figures lurking in the shadows, their eyes glinting with malevolence. As Sophia explored this nightmarish realm, she began to realize that it was a reflection of her own mind, a physical manifestation of her deepest fears and darkest desires. She saw echoes of herself in the twisted creatures that inhabited this place, distorted reflections of her own psyche. The more time Sophia spent in this dark place, the more she felt herself being drawn into it. She became obsessed with exploring its depths, pushing herself to go deeper and deeper into her own subconscious. She neglected her work and her relationships, spending all her time locked away in her apartment, lost in her own inner world. As the weeks turned into months, Sophia's friends and family began to worry about her. They tried to reach out to her, to pull her back from the brink of madness. But Sophia was too far gone. She had become a prisoner of her own mind, trapped in a never-ending cycle of darkness and despair. One day, Sophia's sister, Olivia, decided to take matters into her own hands. She had always been close to Sophia and couldn't bear to see her suffering like this. She convinced Sophia to let her sit in on one of her meditation sessions, hoping to understand what was happening to her sister. As Olivia watched Sophia slip into a deep trance, she felt a sense of unease wash over her. She could see the pain and torment etched into her sister's face, the way her body twitched and convulsed as if fighting against some unseen force. Suddenly, Sophia's eyes snapped open, and Olivia found herself staring into a pair of bottomless black pits. Sophia's mouth twisted into a grotesque smile, and she began to speak in a voice that was not her own. "I am the darkness that lurks within," the voice said. "I am the shadow that haunts your dreams. And now, I am free." Olivia tried to run, but she found herself paralyzed with fear. She watched in horror as Sophia's body began to change, her limbs elongating and her skin turning a sickly shade of gray. The creature that had once been her sister rose from the floor, its eyes glinting with malice. In that moment, Olivia knew that the entity that had consumed her sister's mind was not content to remain trapped within the confines of her subconscious. It wanted to be unleashed upon the world, to spread its darkness and despair to all who crossed its path. As the creature that had once been Sophia advanced upon her, Olivia closed her eyes and prayed for a miracle. But deep down, she knew that it was too late. The darkness had won, and nothing would ever be the same again. As the sun began to set on the small town of Ravenwood, a sense of unease settled over the colorful lights and bustling sounds of the annual carnival. Among the crowd of excited onlookers, a group of teenagers gathered around the entrance to the mirror maze, drawn in by the allure of the unknown. As they stepped inside, the air grew cold and still, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the mirrored walls. The maze seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning in unnatural angles that left them disoriented and lost. But it was the reflections that truly unnerved them. Their own faces stared back at them, twisted into grotesque grimaces of fear and despair. Every corner they turned revealed a new version of themselves, each one more twisted and malevolent than the last. As the minutes turned to hours, the teenagers began to lose track of time and reality. The maze seemed to shift and change around them, leading them further into its labyrinthian depths. Their screams of terror went unanswered, drowned out by the eerie laughter that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. But it was when they came face to face with their darkest reflections that the true horror began. Each one of them was confronted with their deepest fears and insecurities, laid bare for all to see. The mirror maze had become a twisted playground for their inner demons, a stage for their most personal nightmares to play out in horrifying detail. As the night wore on, the teenagers found themselves unable to escape the maze's clutches. Every door they tried led them further into its dark heart, trapping them in a never-ending cycle of terror and torment. The lines between reality and illusion blurred, leaving them questioning what was real and what was merely a trick of the mind. And as they stumbled out of the maze at last, their faces pale and haunted, they knew that they had been forever changed by their nightmarish ordeal. The mirror maze had shown them the darkest corners of their souls, forcing them to confront their innermost fears in a twisted dance of psychological torment. As the carnival packed up and left town, the mirror maze remained behind, its dark secrets hidden from prying eyes. But for those teenagers who had dared to enter its twisted halls, the echoes of their nightmarish journey would haunt them forever, a chilling reminder of the thin line between reality and madness. As the moon cast an eerie glow over the abandoned asylum, the group of paranormal investigators cautiously made their way through the decaying halls. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and decay, and a sense of foreboding hung in the air like a thick fog. Elena, the leader of the group, felt a chill run down her spine as she entered the asylum's main hall. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and the floors creaked under their weight. She had heard the stories of the asylum's dark past, of the cruel treatments and experiments conducted on the patients who once lived within these walls. As they moved further into the asylum, the whispers began. Faint at first, like the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze, but growing louder and more insistent as they descended deeper into the bowels of the building. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing off the walls and reverberating through their minds. Elena tried to shake off the feeling of unease that was creeping over her, but the whispers grew louder, more urgent. They seemed to be speaking directly to her, whispering secrets and fears she had long buried deep within her subconscious. As they reached the asylum's former patient rooms, the whispers took on a darker tone. Shadows flickered in the corners of the rooms, and the air grew thick with a sense of malevolence. One by one, the investigators began to feel the weight of the asylum's troubled past pressing down upon them, their own fears and insecurities rising to the surface. As they reached the basement, the heart of the asylum's darkness, the whispers reached a fever pitch. Elena felt a cold hand grip her heart as she beheld the dimly lit room before them. Rows of rusted metal beds lined the walls, and a sense of sorrow and despair hung heavy in the air. And then, in the center of the room, they saw it, a figure shrouded in darkness, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The whispers coalesced into a single voice, cold and mocking, as it spoke directly to Elena. "You cannot escape your past, Elena. You cannot run from the darkness that dwells within you." Elena felt a scream building in her throat, but before she could release it, the figure vanished into the shadows, leaving nothing but an echoing silence in its wake. As the investigators made their way back to the entrance of the asylum, Elena knew that they had disturbed something deep and dark within those walls. And as they stepped out into the cool night air, she couldn't shake the feeling that the whispers would follow them, haunting their every step for eternity. As the sun set on the isolated bed and breakfast, Sarah and Michael checked into their room, unaware of the dark secrets that lay hidden within its walls. The innkeeper, a gaunt figure with sunken eyes, handed them an old-fashioned key and warned them to be careful of the hidden room on the second floor. Without another word, he left them to their own devices in the dimly lit hallway. Curiosity piqued, Sarah and Michael couldn't resist the temptation to explore the mysterious room. As they turned the key in the lock, the door creaked open to reveal a small, windowless space with faded wallpaper and a musty smell that sent shivers down their spines. Inside the room, an ornate mirror stood against the back wall, its surface reflecting their fearful expressions back at them. Sarah reached out to touch the mirror, only to recoil as a cold chill ran down her spine. The mirror seemed to ripple and distort, as if reflecting a distorted reality beyond their own. As they stared into the mirror, Sarah and Michael's reflections began to shift and change, taking on sinister expressions and dark shadows that seemed to move independently of their own movements. The room itself seemed to close in around them, the walls closing in as if to suffocate them in its darkness. Panic set in as Sarah and Michael tried to escape the nightmare room, but the door had vanished, leaving them trapped in a twisted reality of their own making. The mirror's reflection taunted them, mocking their fear and feeding off their growing sense of dread. Hours passed, and the room became a prison of their worst fears and deepest regrets. Sarah and Michael's sanity began to fray as the mirror whispered twisted secrets and distorted truths that twisted their minds and tore at their fragile grasp of reality. In a final act of desperation, Sarah smashed the mirror with a chair, shattering the illusion and breaking the spell that held them captive. As the shards fell to the floor, the room returned to its normal state, the door reappearing as if by magic. Exhausted and shaken, Sarah and Michael stumbled out of the nightmare room, grateful to be free of its sinister influence. But the memory of their ordeal haunted them, a lingering reminder of the darkness that lurked within the mirror's depths. As they left the bed and breakfast behind, Sarah and Michael couldn't shake the feeling that the nightmare room had changed them in ways they couldn't begin to understand. The mirror's twisted reflection lingered in their minds, a haunting reminder of the true horrors that lay hidden within their own souls. Luke Mitchell loved his job as a nurse at Blackridge Hospital, despite the long hours and hectic environment. There was something deeply satisfying about being there for people in their most vulnerable moments and helping them on the road to recovery. The old hospital building had begun to show its age, with its creaky floors and dim hallway lighting, but Luke didn't mind the atmosphere. If anything, it gave the place a comforting, nostalgic vibe. At least, that's how he felt before the strange occurrences began. It started small, strange noises at night when the halls were empty, objects being moved or going missing, that sort of thing. Just chalked up to aging infrastructure and the sloppiness of rushed medical staff at first. But then things took a more sinister turn. One night, while making his rounds, Luke walked past an unoccupied patient room and saw a flicker of movement through the door window out of the corner of his eye. He backtracked and peered inside and felt his blood turn to ice in his veins. Hunched over the empty bed was the unmistakable figure of a hunched, grotesquely thin woman, her face obscured by long, stringy black hair. She almost seemed to be gnawing at something on the bed. Luke blinked and the figure vanished as if it had never been there at all. He spent several minutes searching the room, his pulse pounding, but found no trace that anything had been amiss. He tried to convince himself his eyes had just played tricks on him from exhaustion and the room's dim lighting. Over the next few weeks, the incidents became more frequent and more disturbing. Patients began whispering about a terrifying thin woman that would appear at the foot of their beds or lurk in dark corners of their rooms. In the night, agonizing wails and sobs could be heard echoing from seemingly vacant wings of the building. Puddles of a dark, sticky liquid would show up on the floors with no apparent origin. Luke grew increasingly haunted and restless, his anxiety mounting with every encounter. What malevolent force was at work within these aged walls? He couldn't understand how any of it could be real, and yet too many people were experiencing the exact same phenomena for it all to be dismissed as mere hallucinations or imagination. Things finally came to a head on a quiet Tuesday night. Luke was doing his normal rounds when he heard a sickening scraping sound coming from down the hallway. He froze, seconds feeling like hours as he tried to identify the nerve-shredding noise. Slowly, almost against his own volition, he inched forward towards the source. The sounds were coming from behind an old linen closet door. Luke's heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat as he slowly reached for the handle. With a trembling hand, he seized the doorknob, mustered every ounce of courage he had left, and flung the door open. Hunched over in the corner, in a seemingly impossible space in that tiny closet, was the thin woman. Luke felt his bladder let go involuntarily as his eyes took in the grotesque sight before him. The entity turned its head, revealing sunken black pits for eyes and a mouth contorted in a rictus of agony as it let out a deafening, inhuman screech. Clutched in its bony arms were the semi-devoured remains of what appeared to be a child. Luke slammed the door shut, turned, and ran as fast as he could out of that hospital, never once looking back. He quit his job immediately and has tried for the last several years to scrub the horrifying memories from his mind through every form of therapy and substance abuse imaginable. But even now, he sees glimpses of that thin woman in his dreams, slowly gnawing towards him with her twisted smile as the sickening shrieks grow louder and louder. It was a dark and stormy night when the traveling puppet show arrived in the small town of Oakwood. The air was thick with anticipation as the children eagerly gathered around the makeshift stage, their eyes wide with excitement. The puppets danced and sang, their movements strangely lifelike, drawing the audience in with their hypnotic charm. Among the crowd was a young girl named Emily, her innocent eyes filled with wonder as she watched the show unfold. But as the night wore on, a sense of unease began to settle in the pit of her stomach. The puppets seemed to be watching her, their painted faces twisted into sinister smiles that sent shivers down her spine. As the show came to an end, Emily made her way back home, the memory of those haunting puppets lingering in her mind. That night, as she lay in bed, she heard a faint whispering coming from the corner of her room. She sat up, her heart pounding in her chest, and saw the shadowy figures of the puppets moving in the darkness. Terrified, Emily tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. The puppets closed in around her, their strings tangled and twisted, their painted faces contorted with malice. They whispered dark secrets and twisted truths into her ear, driving her to the brink of madness. As the night dragged on, Emily found herself trapped in a nightmarish world of her own creation. The puppets tormented her, their voices echoing in the empty room, their sinister laughter ringing in her ears. She tried to escape, but the walls seemed to close in around her, trapping her in a prison of her own fears. Hours turned into days, and Emily's mind began to unravel under the relentless assault of the puppets' whispers. She no longer knew what was real and what was a figment of her imagination. The line between sanity and madness blurred, and she found herself teetering on the edge of a bottomless abyss. In the end, Emily's screams were lost in the darkness, swallowed by the malevolent spirits that haunted her every waking moment. The puppet show had left a mark on her soul, a twisted scar that would never fully heal. And as the town woke to the news of a young girl gone missing, the whispers of the puppets continued to haunt the shadows, their presence a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked within us all. Samantha Kessler loved her job as property manager of Oakwood Apartments. The beautiful Art Deco building had such rich history and character that came with maintaining its vintage charm while providing modern amenities for tenants. She took great pride in her work, keeping the place looking immaculate inside and out. At least, that's how Samantha felt in the beginning, before the strange occurrences that would shake her perspective of reality forever. It started small tenants reporting items being moved or going missing in their units, though no signs of foul play or break-ins. Dark stains would appear on carpets and walls without explanation, despite Samantha's rigorous cleaning efforts. An occasional complaint about unidentified noises echoing at night through the vents and hallways. Samantha did her best to placate the tenants and assure them the issues were being addressed, all while privately brushing it off as the eccentricities that came with any old building. But she couldn't ignore the sinking feeling of dread that something was amiss. The atmosphere of Oakwood began taking on an unmistakable darkness and heaviness that she couldn't quite put her finger on. Then came the night that changed everything for Samantha. She was doing her usual evening walkthrough to ensure everything was secure when she heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the laundry room. She raced down the hallway, terrified thoughts of an intruder or assault clouding her mind. When she burst through the door, Samantha wasn't prepared for the bone-chilling sight that awaited her. Hunched over the washing machines was a desiccated figure, emaciated and naked with leathery gray skin pulled taut over protruding bones. As it turned toward her, Samantha felt her stomach lurch at the sight of its hollow eye sockets and mouth contorted into a perpetual scream. It let out an ungodly wail that seemed to chill the entire room as it began scuttling towards her in a spider-like crawl. Samantha slammed the door shut and fled, her heart thundering in her throat. She raced to her apartment and barricaded herself inside, desperately trying to process the nightmare she had just witnessed. No matter how hard she tried to rationalize it as a waking dream or trick of shadows and light, she knew what she had seen was horrifyingly, undeniably real. In the following days, the paranormal activity around Oakwood only intensified. Tenants began reporting shadowy apparitions lurking in their peripheral vision at night. That same banshee-like shrieking would echo through the hallways at all hours. Cryptic hieroglyphs and symbols reminiscent of occult writing began appearing on the walls, only to vanish just as inexplicably. Several tenants broke their leases and fled, convinced the building was haunted or possessed by demonic entities. Samantha descended into a spiral of obsessive research and investigation into Oakwood's past, desperate for an explanation. What she finally uncovered only brought more horrifying questions than answers. The building had previously been the home of a reclusive occultist back in the 1920s who was rumored to have been experimenting with forbidden rituals and opening doors that should never have been opened. Could the entities now haunting Oakwood be the result of those blasphemous practices nearly a century ago? Samantha knew she needed to take whatever heinous supernatural forces had been unleashed upon this place. She needed to find a way to fight back or escape before she lost her sanity completely. But every time she glimpsed that withered, shrieking monstrosity out of the corner of her eye, she knew that might already be a lost cause. As much as she wanted to run away from the abyss of darkness consuming Oakwood, Samantha feared it was already far too late. That the hellish abyss had opened not just in the building's walls, but within her very soul as well. As the group of paranormal investigators entered the abandoned asylum, a sense of foreboding washed over them. The dilapidated building loomed ominously in the moonlit night, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. They had heard the stories of the vengeful spirits that lingered within the walls, but they had come prepared with their equipment, determined to uncover the truth. As they navigated the decaying hallways, the air grew thick with an almost tangible sense of dread. Strange shadows danced on the walls, and whispers seemed to echo from the darkness. The lead investigator, a seasoned professional named Sarah, felt a chill run down her spine as she reached out to open a door leading to the asylum's old operating theater. The room was filled with a cold, eerie silence, broken only by the creaking of the floorboards beneath their feet. Sarah's flashlight flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the room, causing the investigators to jump in alarm. They scrambled to find the source of the noise, but all they found was an old gurney lying overturned in the corner. As they continued their exploration, the whispers grew louder, taunting them with secrets from the asylum's dark past. Sarah could feel the weight of the building pressing down on her, a suffocating sense of despair that threatened to consume her. The others in the group began to show signs of unease, their eyes wide with fear as they heard footsteps echoing in the hallways behind them. In a moment of desperation, Sarah decided to conduct a seance in an attempt to communicate with the spirits that haunted the asylum. She gathered her team in a circle, their hands linked as they called out to the other side. Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the room, blowing out their flashlights and plunging them into darkness. And then, they heard it. A whisper, soft at first, but growing louder and more insistent. The voice spoke of pain and suffering, of broken promises and lost souls. Sarah could feel the presence of something malevolent in the room, a force that seemed to be drawing them in closer. As the whispers intensified, Sarah knew they had trespassed into territory they could not comprehend. The spirits of the asylum were not content to merely haunt the living, they sought to possess them, to make them pay for the sins of the past. In a final act of desperation, Sarah screamed out a prayer, begging for salvation from the darkness that threatened to consume them. And just as suddenly as it had begun, the whispers ceased, the shadows receded, and the investigators found themselves alone in the silent asylum once more. But as they made their way back to the entrance, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of the evil that lurked within those walls. The asylum held secrets that would forever haunt her dreams, a reminder of the thin line between the living and the dead in a world where darkness reigned supreme. Sarah and Mike Wilkins were thrilled about their recent purchase of the old Green Meadows farm. Sure, the rustic two-story farmhouse was a bit run down and needed some TLC, but they saw so much potential to create their dream home surrounded by the gorgeous rural landscape. If only they knew the nightmares that would soon plague them within those walls. It started with little things, strange noises in the night, lights flickering inexplicably, doors creaking open on their own. Easily explainable quirks of an aging home, Sarah and Mike thought at first. But soon, the occurrences took on far more menacing and unsettling tone. One morning, Sarah woke to find every cabinet door in the kitchen flung wide open, all their contents spilled across the counters and floor in a staggering mess. Later that same week, Mike went outside to do yard work only to find all their tools and lawn equipment strewn haphazardly across the fields in a bizarre pattern looking almost ritualistic. Both Sarah and Mike started seeing fleeting shapes plummeting through their peripheral vision while inside the house, dark, twisting forms that vanished the second they tried to focus on them. The thuds and unexplained noises grew louder and more persistent, oftentimes sounding like heavy footsteps in the dead of night. Then came the incident that robbed the couple of any remaining skepticism about supernatural forces at play. Sarah woke one night to what sounded like unearthly shrieks and wails echoing from the downstairs den. Heart pounding with dread, she crept to the banister overlooking the living room below and felt her blood turn to ice at the scene before her. Sprawled in a corner was a massive, vaguely humanoid figure silhouetted only in undulating shadow, wisps of darkness coalescing into a faint, screaming mob before dissolving again. Dangling from one of its elongated limbs was a smaller dark shape, almost like a person thrashing about. Sarah watched in petrified horror as the amorphous abomination dragged the flailing form towards its churning vortex, eventually consuming it completely in a gurgly rush of air like a vacuum before collapsing into stillness. By the time Mike rushed in with a baseball bat, having heard the same ungodly shrieks, there was no visible trace of the hellish scene Sarah had been frozen witness to. Just the acrid stench of rot and decay lingering in the stale air, turning both their stomachs. In the following nights, Sarah and Mike were plagued by visions of demonic figures congealing from the shadows around them whenever woke. Their dreams were a suffocating loop of being chased through endless blood-soaked hallways and chambers by lumbering monstrosities with guttural bellows, always seconds from being consumed. When local authorities inevitably wrote them off as crackpots, the couple started feverishly researching the land's history, desperate for an explanation. They learned Green Meadows had originally belonged to a secretive cult rumored to practice ancient Sumerian blood rituals back in the 1800s. Could their dream home be a gateway allowing those demented entities to slip through into reality once more? Whatever the root of the evil now tormenting them, Sarah and Mike knew their only hope for survival was fleeing Green Meadows immediately. They packed up what little they could and abandoned the property forever. But even after putting miles between them and the accursed farm, the visions and nightmares would never fully fade. Just when they thought they had moved on, some small occurrence of flickering light, a whispered groan from the shadows, the rancid scent of death and decay would send them hurtling back into the depths of sheer terror. Deep down, they knew the forces they had stirred at Green Meadows would never fully be escaped. Those ancient shadows had tasted their darkest fears and implanted themselves in their psyches permanently. and they would forever lie in tormented wait to be rejoined with the souls of Sarah and Mike Wilkins again someday. As the Johnson family settled into their new home, they were thrilled to have found such a beautiful and spacious house. However, their excitement soon turned to fear as they discovered a hidden painting in the attic. The painting seemed to radiate an eerie energy, its colors shifting and changing as if alive. Mrs. Johnson couldn't resist the urge to hang the painting in the living room. As soon as it was in place, strange things began to happen. The once cheerful atmosphere of the house turned dark and oppressive, with an unexplainable sense of dread hanging in the air. Mr. Johnson, a skeptic by nature, dismissed the family's fears as mere superstition. But the painting seemed to have a mind of its own, twisting and warping reality in its shadows. The once harmonious household descended into chaos, with tempers flaring and paranoia taking hold. Mrs. Johnson, in particular, was affected by the painting. She began to have vivid nightmares, each more terrifying than the last. She saw figures moving in the shadows, whispering dark promises and chilling warnings. The lines between dreams and reality blurred, leaving her questioning her own sanity. The children, normally bubbly and full of energy, became withdrawn and sullen. They spoke of seeing strange figures lurking in the corners of their rooms at night, of hearing whispers in the darkness that sent shivers down their spines. As the days passed, the painting seemed to grow more powerful, its influence spreading like a disease throughout the house. Mr. Johnson, once a pillar of strength, found himself plagued by doubts and insecurities, his mind clouded by the painting's malevolent presence. One evening, as a thick mist enveloped the neighborhood, Mrs. Johnson found herself drawn to the painting once more. Its colors seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light, beckoning her closer. With trembling hands, she reached out to touch the canvas. In that moment, a deafening silence descended upon the house. The walls seemed to whisper ancient curses, and the air grew heavy with foreboding. Mrs. Johnson's hand froze inches from the painting, her heart pounding in her chest. And then, with a sudden, violent shudder, the painting came to life. Figures twisted and writhed on the canvas, their eyes blazing with malevolent intent. Mrs. Johnson screamed, a sound that echoed through the house like a banshee's wail. As the painting's dark magic took hold, the Johnson family found themselves trapped in a nightmare of their own making. The cursed painting's twisted power consumed them, twisting their minds and souls until there was nothing left but darkness and despair. And in the end, all that remained was the haunting echo of their screams, lost to the world forever. In the quaint town of Willowbrook, there stood an old antique shop known for its collection of mysterious and eerie artifacts. Among the items on display was a set of antique dolls, each with a haunting presence that seemed to draw in unsuspecting visitors. The dolls, with their vacant eyes and porcelain faces, exuded an air of malice that sent shivers down the spines of anyone who dared to gaze upon them. One day, a young woman named Samantha wandered into the shop, drawn by an inexplicable force to the unsettling display of dolls. Her curiosity piqued. She couldn't tear her eyes away from a particularly striking doll with long, flowing curls and a delicate lace dress. The shopkeeper noticed Samantha's interest and informed her that the doll was said to be cursed, whispering dark secrets to anyone who owned it. Ignoring the shopkeeper's warning, Samantha purchased the doll and brought it home with her. That night, as she lay in bed, she heard a soft whispering coming from the doll's direction. At first, she dismissed it as her imagination, but as the nights passed, the whispers grew louder and more sinister. The doll seemed to come to life in the darkness, its porcelain eyes gleaming with a malevolent gleam. Samantha's once peaceful nights were now filled with terror as the doll's whispers tormented her, revealing her deepest fears and insecurities. She tried to rid herself of the cursed doll, but it always found its way back into her possession, its whispers growing louder with each passing day. As Samantha's mind began to unravel under the doll's torment, she sought help from a renowned psychic who specialized in paranormal phenomena. The psychic revealed that the doll was a vessel for trapped souls seeking vengeance, its whispers a manifestation of their pain and anguish. Determined to break free from the doll's curse, Samantha embarked on a dangerous journey to uncover the truth behind its origins. With each step closer to the dark secret hidden within the doll, the whispers grew more insidious, driving her to the brink of madness. In a chilling climax, Samantha finally uncovered the truth behind the doll's curse, but at a devastating cost. The doll's whispers ceased, but the echoes of its malevolent presence lingered in the shadows, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked within. The whispering dolls served as a cautionary tale of the dangers of dabbling in the unknown, a psychological thriller that delved into the depths of the human psyche and the consequences of unleashing forces beyond our understanding. As the whispers of the cursed dolls faded into silence, the town of Willowbrook was left with a lingering sense of unease, a reminder that some curses are best left undisturbed. Once upon a time in a small town, there lived a young girl named Emily who was gifted a collection of antique dolls from her late grandmother. Among the dolls was a particularly eerie-looking one, with glassy eyes that seemed to follow Emily wherever she went. As the days went by, Emily began to notice strange whispers coming from the doll. At first, she brushed it off as her imagination playing tricks on her. However, the whispers grew louder and more sinister, urging Emily to do things she knew were wrong. One night, unable to resist the doll's commands any longer, Emily found herself standing over her sleeping parents with a knife in her hand. Horror consumed her as she realized what she was about to do, but it was as if the doll had complete control over her. In a moment of clarity, Emily threw the knife aside and ran out of the house, desperate to escape the doll's influence. But wherever she went, the whispers followed, taunting her and driving her to the brink of madness. As the days turned into weeks, Emily's once bright and happy demeanor faded, replaced by a haunted look in her eyes. She became a shell of her former self, consumed by the darkness that the doll had unleashed within her. One fateful night, Emily found herself standing on the edge of a cliff, the doll whispering in her ear to end it all. Tears streaming down her face, she looked down at the crashing waves below, unsure of what to do. In a moment of sheer willpower, Emily threw the doll over the cliff, watching as it disappeared into the depths below. Instantly, the whispers stopped, and Emily felt a weight lift off her shoulders. But as she turned to leave, a chilling voice echoed in her mind, promising that the doll would always be with her, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Emily knew that the nightmare was far from over, and that she would have to live with the consequences of her actions for the rest of her days. As she walked away from the cliff, the wind carried a faint whisper to her ears, a reminder that some horrors are not easily defeated, and that the shadows of the past will always find a way to haunt the present. In the quiet town of Crestwood, a sense of unease lingered in the air as rumors spread about a mysterious inventor who had created a machine that could bring nightmares to life. Dr. Evelyn Stone, a renowned psychiatrist, was intrigued by the reports and decided to investigate the machine herself. As she entered the inventor's workshop, a chill ran down her spine. The walls were lined with intricate contraptions and strange gadgets, but it was the nightmare machine that drew her attention. A large, menacing device with pulsating lights and whirring gears, it emanated a sense of malevolence that made Dr. Stone's skin crawl. The inventor, a reclusive man named Dr. Victor Blackwood, explained that the machine used advanced technology to tap into the subconscious mind and extract the most vivid and terrifying nightmares of its subjects. Dr. Stone was both fascinated and disturbed by the concept, but she knew there was a fine line between curiosity and danger. Despite her reservations, Dr. Stone agreed to participate in an experiment with the nightmare machine. As she strapped herself into the chair and closed her eyes, a wave of dread washed over her. The machine whirred to life, and Dr. Stone was plunged into a world of darkness and despair. In her nightmare, Dr. Stone found herself trapped in a desolate landscape, surrounded by twisted, shadowy figures that whispered taunts and threats. The air was heavy with fear and dread, and Dr. Stone struggled to find a way out of the nightmare's grasp. As the nightmare continued to unfold, Dr. Stone realized that the line between reality and illusion was blurring. The horrors she faced in the dream world began to manifest in the real world, as the shadows in the room seemed to come alive and the whispers grew louder and more sinister. Panic gripped Dr. Stone as she fought to break free from the nightmare's grasp. Just when she thought she would be consumed by fear, the nightmare machine finally powered down and Dr. Stone was released from its grip. Shaken but determined, Dr. Stone confronted Dr. Blackwood about the dangers of his invention. She warned him of the potential harm it could cause and urged him to shut down the nightmare machine before it was too late. As she left the workshop, Dr. Stone couldn't shake the feeling that something dark and malevolent lingered in the shadows. The nightmare machine had opened a door to a world of unimaginable terror, and Dr. Stone knew that its influence would continue to haunt her dreams for years to come. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the old Victorian mansion, the family settled into their new home with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The house had a storied past, with rumors of hauntings and strange occurrences that only added to its mystique. But it wasn't until they discovered the hidden attic that things took a sinister turn. The attic was musty and dimly lit, filled with boxes of forgotten treasures and dusty old furniture. But it was the whispers that sent shivers down their spines. At first, they were barely audible, like a soft breeze rustling through the rafters. But as the days passed, the whispers grew louder and more insistent, hinting at dark secrets and buried tragedies. The family tried to ignore the whispers, chalking them up to their imaginations or the creaks and groans of an old house settling. But the whispers persisted, weaving their way into their dreams and thoughts, driving a wedge between them as paranoia and fear took root. As the whispers grew more urgent, the family became consumed by a sense of foreboding, as if something malevolent lurked just beyond their perception. Doors slammed shut on their own, objects moved inexplicably in the night, and shadows danced in the corners of their vision. But it was in the mirror in the attic that they found the source of the whispers. The glass seemed to ripple and distort, reflecting twisted images of the family members that bore no resemblance to their true selves. And in those reflections, they saw the truth of the house's dark history, of the unspeakable horrors that had taken place within its walls. As the family descended into madness, each one succumbing to the whispers and the twisted reality they projected, they realized that the only way to escape was to confront the darkness within themselves. But as they delved deeper into the secrets of the house, they discovered that some truths were too terrifying to face. In the end, the family was consumed by the shadows, their souls forever trapped in the attic, doomed to whisper their own dark secrets for eternity. And as the moon glowed eerily through the attic window, the whispers grew louder, echoing through the empty halls of the old Victorian mansion, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lay within its walls. In the heart of the bustling city, nestled among the winding streets and shadowed alleyways, there stood a small antique shop known as Raven's Curiosities. The shop's proprietor, a mysterious figure known only as Madame Raven, was said to possess a collection of rare and peculiar items that intrigued both collectors and skeptics alike. But there was one particular item in Madame Raven's possession that held a dark and sinister reputation, a cursed amulet rumored to grant its owner's darkest desires at a terrible cost. One fateful night, a young antique dealer named Ethan wandered into Raven's Curiosities in search of a rare artifact to add to his collection. Drawn to the amulet's twisted design and ominous aura, Ethan struck a deal with Madame Raven to purchase the cursed trinket, unaware of the dark forces lurking within. As soon as Ethan took possession of the amulet, a chill ran down his spine, and a sense of unease settled over him like a heavy shroud. Ignoring the warning signs, he brought the amulet back to his apartment and placed it on display in his personal collection. That night, as Ethan slept soundly in his bed, a whispering voice filled his dreams, promising him power beyond imagination in exchange for his soul. Unable to resist the allure of such power, Ethan's mind became consumed by thoughts of wealth, fame, and influence, all at the cost of his humanity. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan's behavior grew increasingly erratic and obsessive. His once thriving antique business began to crumble as he neglected his duties and alienated his colleagues and friends. The amulet's sinister influence seeped into every aspect of his life, twisting his desires into twisted fantasies and leading him down a path of self-destruction. As the days turned into sleepless nights filled with torment and paranoia, Ethan began to see twisted visions of shadowy figures lurking in the corners of his apartment, whispering dark secrets and driving him to the brink of insanity. The amulet's cursed power had taken hold of his mind, manipulating his thoughts and emotions with ruthless precision. Desperate to break free from the amulet's hold, Ethan sought out Madame Raven once more, begging her to take back the cursed artifact and spare him from its malevolent influence. But Madame Raven only smiled knowingly and whispered a single word of warning: beware. In the end, Ethan's fate was sealed by his own greed and ambition. Trapped in a cycle of torment and despair, he became a prisoner of the cursed amulet, forever bound to its dark and twisted desires. And as the whispers grew louder and the shadows closed in around him, Ethan realized too late that some treasures were better left undisturbed. As the new owners of the sprawling Victorian estate, the Peterson family was excited to start their new life in the quaint town of Willow Hollow. The house, with its grand architecture and rich history, seemed like the perfect place to raise their young daughter, Emily. However, little did they know that the house held a dark secret. It started innocently enough. Strange whispers could be heard late at night, seemingly coming from the attic. At first, the Petersons dismissed it as the house settling or the wind whistling through old rafters. But as the whispers grew louder and more defined, they couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling that something sinister was at play. Emily, always the curious one, seemed to be particularly affected by the whispers. She would often wander up to the attic on her own, spending hours locked away in a world of her own creation. The Petersons grew concerned, but every time they tried to talk to Emily about it, she would simply smile and change the subject. As the days turned into weeks, the whispers became more insistent, more demanding. The Petersons found themselves losing sleep, haunted by the eerie voices that seemed to follow them wherever they went. They tried to ignore it, to push it aside and focus on their new life in Willow Hollow, but the whispers wouldn't let them forget. One night, unable to take it any longer, Mr. Peterson decided to investigate the attic himself. What he found there would change the course of their lives forever. Tucked away in a dusty corner was an old mirror, its surface covered in strange symbols and markings. As he gazed into the mirror, he felt a chill run down his spine. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if begging to be heard. Mr. Peterson stumbled back, knocking over a box of old trinkets and mementos. Among the items was a faded photograph of a family that bore a striking resemblance to the Petersons. But there was something off about the family in the photo, something that sent shivers down Mr. Peterson's spine. As he turned to leave, the whispers suddenly stopped. In their place was a deafening silence that seemed to echo through the house. The Petersons knew then that whatever had been hiding in the attic was now free, unleashed upon their unsuspecting family. From that day on, the whispers never returned. But the Petersons would always wonder what lurked in the shadows of their attic, waiting to be set free once more. And as they drifted off to sleep each night, they could still hear the faint echoes of the voices that had haunted them for so long. In the heart of a dense forest, a group of hikers found themselves enveloped in a mysterious mist that whispered their deepest fears. The mist seemed to possess a sinister intelligence as it led them deeper into the woods, away from the safety of the trail. Each whisper seemed to be tailored to each individual, striking at their vulnerabilities and insecurities with uncanny precision. As the hikers trudged on, the mist grew denser, obscuring their vision and disorienting their senses. Shadows danced at the edge of their sight, whispering dark secrets that echoed through the fog. The hikers tried to stay together, but the mist seemed to separate them, isolating each one in their own personal nightmare. One by one, the hikers succumbed to the siren call of the whispers, driven to confront their darkest fears. A young woman heard the voice of her deceased mother, urging her to repent for past sins. A middle-aged man saw visions of his failed career and broken relationships, taunting him with his own perceived inadequacies. And a lone hiker, haunted by the memories of a traumatic childhood, was goaded by the mist to face his most painful memories. As the mist tightened its grip on their minds, the hikers began to lose touch with reality. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, pushing them to the brink of madness. Shadows surrounded them, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes that mirrored their innermost fears. The forest itself seemed to come alive, its looming trees casting long, twisted shadows that whispered cruel taunts and malevolent promises. In a desperate bid to escape the torment of the mist, the hikers tried to find their way back to the safety of the trail. But the whispers followed them, a relentless tide of darkness that threatened to consume them whole. As they stumbled through the fog, each step felt heavier, each breath more suffocating. They knew that they were running out of time, that the mist was closing in on them, ready to claim their souls for eternity. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, the mist began to dissipate, slowly fading away to reveal the clear blue sky above. The hikers found themselves standing at the edge of the forest, shaken but alive. They had survived the whispering mist, but the memories of that harrowing experience would haunt them for the rest of their days. For in that dark and eerie forest, they had come face to face with their own inner demons, forced to confront the shadows that lurked within their own minds. Upon the craggy cliffs of a desolate coastline stood the haunting silhouette of the old lighthouse, its weathered facade a testament to years of neglect and abandonment. The wind howled through the empty corridors, carrying with it the whispers of the restless spirits that dwelled within. The lighthouse keeper, a solitary figure named Owen, had taken up residence in the decaying structure after fleeing the demons of his past. Haunted by memories of a tragic accident that had claimed the lives of his family, Owen sought solace in the solitude of the abandoned lighthouse. But as the days turned into endless nights, Owen began to hear eerie whispers echoing through the walls of his lonely abode. The voices spoke of unspeakable horrors and whispered of vengeful spirits seeking retribution for long-forgotten sins. Unable to shake the feeling of unease that gripped his soul, Owen delved deeper into the history of the lighthouse, uncovering a dark and twisted past filled with tragedy and despair. The spirits of those who had perished within its walls were restless, their anguished cries reverberating through the empty halls. As the whispers grew louder and more insistent, Owen's grip on reality began to slip. Shadows danced at the edge of his vision, taunting him with their malevolent presence. The boundary between the living and the dead blurred, and Owen found himself trapped in a nightmarish world of his own making. Desperate to escape the torment that plagued him, Owen sought out the source of the whispers, venturing deeper into the bowels of the lighthouse than he had ever dared before. And there, hidden away in a long-forgotten chamber, he discovered the truth that had been concealed for so long. The spirits of the lighthouse were not seeking vengeance for their own deaths, but for the sins of the living. Owen's past had followed him to this desolate place, and now he was forced to confront the darkness that lurked within his own soul. As the whispers grew louder and more insistent, Owen realized that the only way to free himself from the grasp of the vengeful spirits was to confront his inner demons head-on. With a steely resolve, he faced the horrors of his past, embracing the darkness that had haunted him for so long. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the whispers faded into the wind, their ethereal voices carried away on the morning breeze. Owen emerged from the lighthouse, a changed man, free from the shackles of his past and ready to face whatever horrors the future may hold. In the dead of night, the Nightmare Carnival arrived in the small town of Ravenwood without warning. The dark silhouette of the twisted roller coaster and eerie funhouse loomed ominously against the full moon, sending shivers down the spines of the townspeople. Curiosity and fear gripped the residents as they ventured towards the carnival grounds, drawn by an invisible force that whispered promises of thrills and terror. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding as they passed through the rusted gates, the faint sound of sinister laughter echoing in the distance. As the night went on, the carnival transformed into a nightmare realm. The once vibrant and colorful attractions now exuded an aura of malevolence, their distorted shapes casting twisted shadows that danced in the moonlight. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and despair, as if the very essence of fear had taken root in the carnival. The residents found themselves ensnared in a web of terror as the carnival played out its sinister game. Illusions and hallucinations blurred the lines between reality and nightmare, driving them to the brink of insanity. The attractions themselves seemed to come alive, their twisted forms reaching out to claim unsuspecting victims who dared to venture too close. Among the crowd was Emily, a young woman with a haunted past. As she navigated the nightmare world of the carnival, she became increasingly aware of a sinister presence watching her every move. Whispers filled her mind, speaking of forgotten sins and dark secrets that threatened to consume her soul. As the night wore on, Emily found herself trapped in a nightmarish carousel that spun endlessly, the figures on its painted horses morphing into grotesque creatures that mocked her futile attempts to escape. The laughter of unseen entities taunted her as she struggled to maintain her grip on reality. Desperation clawed at Emily's mind as she fought against the relentless assault of fear and madness. Her determination wavered as the carnival's twisted illusions played out before her, each more horrifying than the last. And in the depths of her terror, she realized that the nightmare carnival existed not only to entertain but to torment and destroy those who dared to enter its realm. As the first light of dawn broke through the darkness, the nightmare carnival vanished without a trace, leaving behind a town scarred by the horrors of the night. And though the residents tried to convince themselves it was all a dream, Emily knew the truth. The nightmare they had experienced was all too real, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks within us all. As I stepped into the dimly lit museum, a sense of unease washed over me. The air seemed to hum with an eerie energy, as if the ancient portraits on the walls were watching my every move. I found myself drawn to a collection of portraits in the far corner of the room. The faces in the paintings seemed to shift and change as I gazed at them, their eyes following me with a haunting intensity. And then, I heard a faint whisper, barely audible over the hushed murmur of the other museum patrons. I stepped closer to the portraits, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as if the subjects of the paintings were trying to tell me something. I strained to make out the words, my skin prickling with a sudden chill. "Help us," the voices pleaded, their words echoing through the chamber. "We are trapped, lost in this endless torment. Save us." I stumbled back, my breath coming in short gasps. The others in the room seemed oblivious to the haunting voices, lost in their own worlds of art and history. But I could not ignore the desperate cries of the trapped souls within the portraits. With trembling hands, I reached out to touch the closest painting. As my fingers brushed against the canvas, a surge of icy energy shot through me, sending shivers down my spine. The image before me flickered and wavered, revealing a glimpse of a shadowy figure lurking just beyond the frame. I staggered back, my mind reeling with a growing sense of dread. The whispers had turned into a maddening cacophony, their words a jumble of pleas and warnings. I knew then that I had stumbled upon something far darker and more sinister than I could have ever imagined. As I turned to flee the museum, the portraits seemed to come alive, their figures twisting and contorting in an unnatural dance. The air grew thick with the smell of decay and despair, suffocating me with its oppressive weight. I raced through the halls, my heart pounding in my ears. The whispers followed me, growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. And then, as I burst through the doors into the blinding sunlight, I saw a figure standing in the shadows, its eyes burning with a malevolent light. The whispers faded into silence, leaving me alone with the chilling knowledge that I had uncovered a darkness beyond my wildest nightmares. And as I looked back at the museum, the portraits seemed to watch me with a dreadful hunger, their silent pleas echoing in my mind for eternity. As the sun began to set on the sleepy town of Willow Creek, a group of friends decided to explore the local carnival that had just rolled into town. Excited laughter filled the air as they made their way through the maze of colorful tents and rides, the cheerful music echoing around them. However, as they entered the mirrored maze, a sense of unease began to settle in the pit of their stomachs. The mirrors distorted their reflections, stretching and warping their features until they were barely recognizable. Each turn seemed to lead them deeper into a labyrinth of confusion and fear, the disorienting effects of the mirrors playing tricks on their minds. As they tried to find their way out, they began to hear whispers, soft and insidious, like the rustling of leaves in a long-forgotten forest. The whispers seemed to be coming from the mirrors themselves, beckoning them further into the maze. As they pressed on, the whispers grew louder, more urgent, filling their minds with dark thoughts and twisted fantasies. It was as if the mirrors were feeding off their fears, amplifying them until they threatened to consume their very souls. One by one, the friends began to succumb to the sinister influence of the mirrors. Paranoia and suspicion tore through their group, turning friends into enemies and sowing seeds of doubt and betrayal. In the darkness of the maze, they saw visions of their deepest fears, their worst nightmares brought to life in chilling detail. Some saw the faces of loved ones twisted in agony, others witnessed their own deaths played out before their eyes. As the whispers grew louder and more incessant, the friends began to lose themselves to the terror of the maze. Reality blurred with nightmare, and they found themselves trapped in a never-ending cycle of fear and despair. But amidst the chaos and confusion, one of them had a sudden realization. The only way to escape the maze was to confront their fears head-on, to face the darkness within themselves and emerge stronger on the other side. With a newfound sense of determination, they led their friends through the maze, pushing back against the whispers and the illusions that threatened to consume them. And as they stepped out into the cool night air, they knew that they had conquered their fears and emerged victorious from the nightmare that had threatened to consume them. For in the twisted depths of the cursed mirror maze, they had found not only terror but also the strength and courage to face the darkness within themselves. And as they walked away from the carnival, the echoes of the whispers faded into the night, leaving only the lingering memory of a nightmarish journey that had tested their very souls. As the sun began to set on the quiet suburban neighborhood, a sense of unease settled over the Jones household. Ever since young Emily had received the antique doll from her late grandmother, strange things had been happening. At first, it was just small things like misplaced items and unexplained sounds in the night. But as the days went by, the doll's presence seemed to cast a dark shadow over the entire house. Emily's parents, Jack and Sarah, tried to dismiss their daughter's claims of the doll moving on its own as a child's overactive imagination. However, the feeling of dread that hung in the air could not be ignored. Sarah found herself waking in the middle of the night, gripped by a sense of impending doom that she couldn't shake. One morning, Jack stumbled upon a journal in the attic that belonged to his great-grandmother, detailing the mysterious circumstances surrounding the antique doll. It was said that the doll had once belonged to a troubled young girl who had met a tragic end, and her restless spirit was said to inhabit the doll. As the days passed, the doll's influence seemed to grow stronger. Emily became withdrawn and started talking to the doll as if it were alive. Sarah noticed a change in her daughter's behavior as she became more erratic and unpredictable. Jack, consumed by his own fears, started seeing glimpses of a shadowy figure lurking in the corners of his vision. One fateful night, as a violent storm raged outside, the family found themselves trapped in the house with the malevolent presence of the doll. Sarah's screams echoed through the house as she realized that the doll's eyes seemed to follow her every move. Jack tried to smash the doll to pieces, but found himself unable to lift a hand against it. In a moment of desperation, Sarah grabbed the doll and threw it into the fireplace, watching as it burned with an otherworldly flame. But as the flames died down, the doll's haunting laughter echoed through the room, chilling them to the bone. As the first light of dawn broke through the storm clouds, the Jones family emerged from their harrowing ordeal changed forever. The doll may have been destroyed, but the scars it left on their souls would never fade. And as they moved out of the house, they couldn't shake the feeling that the doll's malevolent spirit was still watching, waiting to claim its next victim. In a small town nestled deep in the countryside, a dark and ominous secret lurked beneath the surface of the tranquil landscape. The townspeople whispered in hushed tones about the ancient well that stood in the center of the town square, its decrepit stone walls covered in moss and shadows seeming to dance within its depths. No one dared to approach the well, for it was said to hold a sinister power that whispered the names of its next victims to those who dared to listen. One fateful night, a young woman named Sarah stumbled upon the well while taking a shortcut through the town square. Intrigued by the eerie rumors that surrounded it, she couldn't resist the urge to peer into its depths. As she gazed into the dark waters, a cold shiver ran down her spine, and she heard a faint whisper echoing from the depths of the well. Sarah. Her name was spoken in a hollow, chilling voice that sent a wave of fear coursing through her veins. She stumbled back in horror, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to flee from the well. But the whispers followed her, haunting her every step and driving her to the brink of madness. Night after night, Sarah was tormented by the relentless whispers that plagued her every waking moment. The townspeople began to notice her increasingly erratic behavior and whispered amongst themselves about the curse of the well. They warned her to stay away, but Sarah was drawn to the well like a moth to a flame, unable to resist its sinister call. As the whispers grew louder and more insistent, Sarah's grip on reality began to slip. She became obsessed with the well, convinced that it held the key to unlocking the mysteries of the town's dark past. But the more she delved into the well's dark secrets, the more she became entangled in its malevolent grip. One moonless night, Sarah was drawn back to the well by irresistible force. As she peered into its depths, she saw her own reflection staring back at her, twisted and distorted by the shadows that lurked within. In a moment of sheer terror, she realized the truth. The well was not just a vessel for whispers, but a gateway to a realm of darkness that sought to consume her soul. With a primal scream, Sarah threw herself into the well, vanishing into its depths with a haunting echo of her name lingering in the air. And as the townspeople gathered around the well, a chilling silence fell over the once peaceful town, as they knew that the well had claimed another victim to whisper its name for eternity. As the sun began to set over the sleepy town of Willowbrook, the vintage carousel at the local park came to life with a sinister energy. Its once cheerful melody now carried a haunting tune that sent shivers down the spines of those who passed by. Every night, as the clock struck midnight, strange occurrences would unfold around the carousel. Children would mysteriously vanish without a trace, leaving behind only their echoing laughter in the empty park. Locals whispered of a curse that had befallen the carousel, blaming it for the eerie disappearances that plagued the town. One fateful evening, a young girl named Emily decided to investigate the legends surrounding the carousel. Ignoring the warnings of the townspeople, she made her way to the park under the cover of darkness. As she approached the rusted old ride, a cold chill ran down her spine, and she could swear she heard the faint whispers of lost souls calling out to her. With trembling hands, Emily reached out to touch the carousel's ornate horses, their eyes gleaming in the moonlight. Suddenly, the world around her began to spin, and she found herself transported to a nightmarish realm where the laws of reality no longer applied. The once familiar park now twisted and distorted into a surreal landscape of twisted metal and shadowy figures. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she realized she was no longer alone. The ghosts of the missing children materialized around her, their eyes hollow and their souls filled with anguish. Desperate to escape the nightmarish carousel, Emily ran blindly through the misty veil that surrounded her. But no matter how fast she ran, the haunted figures always seemed to be just out of reach, their eerie laughter echoing in her ears. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, Emily found herself back at the entrance of the park, the cursed carousel looming ominously behind her. Exhausted and trembling, she knew that she had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. From that day on, Emily never spoke of her harrowing experience at the haunted carousel. The townspeople whispered of her as the girl who had looked into the eyes of madness and lived to tell the tale. But deep down, Emily knew that a part of her soul would forever be trapped in the twisted world of the cursed carousel, where lost souls danced beneath the blood-red moon. And as the carousel continued to spin its macabre song each night, the echoes of the children's laughter mingled with the whispers of the wind, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked within the hearts of men. As the guests of the quaint bed and breakfast settled in for the night, a sense of unease lingered in the air. The antique mirror that adorned the hallway seemed to hold a sinister presence, reflecting the flickering candlelight in a way that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. One by one, the guests retired to their rooms, unaware of the dark secrets that lurked within the mirror's depths. As the clock struck midnight, a soft whisper echoed through the hallway, drawing each guest to the mirror as if by a malevolent force. In the mirror, they saw not their own reflections, but the lost souls of those who had perished within the walls of the bed and breakfast. Their eyes were hollow, their faces twisted in eternal agony as they reached out to the living with spectral hands. The guests tried to turn away, to flee from the mirror's grasp, but they found themselves rooted to the spot. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as the souls trapped within the mirror begged for release from their torment. One by one, the guests were drawn into the mirror's dark embrace, their screams echoing through the empty halls of the bed and breakfast. The mirror shimmered and shifted, reflecting a nightmarish world where time had no meaning and the boundaries between the living and the dead blurred into nothingness. As dawn broke, the last of the guests stumbled out of their rooms, their eyes wide with terror. They knew they had glimpsed something beyond the realm of the living, something that would haunt their nightmares for years to come. The antique mirror remained, its surface now dark and empty, as if it had never held the twisted reflections of the lost souls. But those who had witnessed its power knew that the darkness within would never truly be vanquished. And so, the bed and breakfast stood silent and empty, its reputation forever tarnished by the curse of the mirror of lost souls. Those who dared to enter its hallowed halls would forever be haunted by the whispers of the damned, their fates intertwined with the dark forces that dwelled within. As the sun set on the small town of Ravenwood, a sense of unease settled over the residents. For weeks, rumors had been circulating about a shadowy figure that lurked in the shadows, whispering dark secrets to those unlucky enough to encounter it. No one knew where it came from or what it wanted, but its presence was undeniable. Grace had always been a skeptical person, dismissing the tales of the whispering shadows as nothing more than superstition. But one night, as she walked home from work, she felt a presence behind her. Turning around, she caught a glimpse of a figure retreating into the darkness, its form obscured by the night. Shaken but determined to prove her rationality, Grace continued on her way. But the whispers began soon after, faint at first but growing louder with each passing day. They told her things she never wanted to hear, secrets she had buried deep within herself. The shadows whispered of her fears, her failures, her most shameful thoughts. Unable to shake the feeling of being watched, Grace sought solace in the comfort of her own home. But even there, the whispers followed her, circling her like vultures waiting for their prey. She tried to ignore them, to drown out the voices in her head, but they persisted, growing more insistent with each passing moment. As the days turned into nights, Grace's sanity began to unravel. The shadows seemed to dance around her, mocking her every move. Her once peaceful existence had become a living nightmare, a twisted realm of darkness and paranoia. Desperate for answers, Grace sought out the town's local historian, hoping to uncover the truth behind the whispering shadows. What she discovered chilled her to the bone. The shadows were the remnants of souls lost to madness, trapped between the realms of the living and the dead. Determined to free herself from their grip, Grace embarked on a journey into the heart of the darkness. As she delved deeper into the mystery, she found herself face to face with the entity that had been haunting her, a twisted reflection of her own deepest fears and desires. In a moment of clarity, Grace realized that the only way to banish the shadows was to confront the darkness within herself. With a newfound strength, she stood tall in the face of her tormentor, staring into the abyss and finding the courage to embrace her own shadows. As the whispers faded into the night, Grace knew that she had conquered her demons. The town of Ravenwood could rest easy once more, knowing that the whispering shadows had been silenced, at least for now. But Grace's journey was far from over, as she carried the weight of her experience with her, a reminder of the thin line between sanity and madness. The old theater stood ominously on the corner of Elm Street, its faded marquee barely visible under a layer of dust and cobwebs. The once grand building now lay abandoned, a shadow of its former glory. But to those who dared to venture inside, the theater held a dark secret that would send shivers down their spines. A group of actors, desperate to revive their failing careers, saw an opportunity in the decaying theater. They planned to stage a grand production, hoping to attract the attention of discerning critics and audiences alike. Little did they know that the theater had other plans for them. As they began rehearsals, strange occurrences plagued the cast and crew. Props would disappear only to reappear in the most unexpected places. Lights flickered and went out at the most crucial moments. And whispers echoed through the empty corridors, sending chills down the spines of even the bravest among them. But it was during a late-night rehearsal that things took a sinister turn. The lead actress, Lisa, found herself alone on the stage, rehearsing her lines. As she delivered a monologue, the lights dimmed, casting her in an eerie glow. And that's when she saw him, a ghostly figure in the audience, clapping slowly and menacingly. Terrified, Lisa tried to flee, but the doors to the theater were locked, trapping her inside. The ghostly figure followed her, his footsteps echoing eerily in the empty theater. And then, he spoke in a chilling voice that sent shivers down her spine. "You cannot escape your fate," he whispered, his words hanging in the air like a dark omen. Lisa knew then that the theater was haunted by the vengeful spirits of past performers, seeking to claim the stage once more. As the other members of the cast and crew gathered on the stage, they too saw the ghostly figure and heard his haunting words. Panic spread like wildfire, and the once grand theater descended into chaos. In a desperate bid to escape, the actors tried to break down the doors, but to no avail. The ghostly figure watched them with cold, empty eyes, his presence a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked within the theater. And as the last echoes of their screams faded away, the theater fell silent once more, its haunted halls bearing witness to the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. The haunted theater had claimed its victims, and the spirits of the past performers had finally taken their revenge. The once grand building now stood as a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked within the human soul. And those who dared to enter would forever be haunted by the ghostly figure who dwelled within its shadows. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the eerie virtual reality game room, a group of unsuspecting players gathered around the latest attraction, the Nightmare Machine. Designed to bring their deepest fears to life in a shared virtual world, the game promised an experience unlike any other. The players strapped on their VR headsets, eager to immerse themselves in the twisted world of their nightmares. As the game began, the room began to fill with a thick fog, obscuring their vision and heightening their sense of unease. One by one, the players found themselves transported to a dark and desolate landscape where the rules of reality seemed to bend and warp at every turn. Shadows danced on the edge of their vision, whispering dark secrets and driving them to the brink of madness. As they navigated the twisted corridors and crumbling buildings of the virtual world, the players began to realize that something was terribly wrong. The nightmares they had once thought were figments of their imagination were now manifesting before their very eyes, threatening to consume them in a maelstrom of terror. One player, a young woman named Sarah, found herself face to face with her greatest fear, a monstrous creature that seemed to embody all of her deepest insecurities and anxieties. As it lunged towards her, its claws outstretched, Sarah screamed in terror, feeling the cold grip of fear tighten around her heart. Another player, a man named James, found himself trapped in a never-ending loop of his darkest memories, reliving past traumas in vivid detail. The lines between reality and illusion blurred, and James struggled to maintain his grasp on sanity as the nightmares consumed him from within. As the game neared its climax, the players realized that they were not in control. The nightmare machine had taken on a life of its own, feeding on their fears and insecurities to grow stronger with each passing moment. The players banded together, determined to find a way out of the nightmarish world before it was too late. With a final burst of courage, they confronted the source of their nightmares, a malevolent entity that had been pulling the strings all along. As the creature loomed before them, its eyes glowing with malice, the players united their strength and pushed back against the darkness that threatened to consume them. And with a final burst of light, the nightmare world faded away, leaving the players breathless and shaken in the dimly lit game room. As they removed their VR headsets and blinked in the harsh reality of the real world, they knew that the nightmare machine had forever changed them, leaving them haunted by the shadows of their own fears. In the end, they realized that the true horror was not the virtual nightmares they had faced, but the darkness that lurked within their own hearts, a darkness that could never truly be defeated, only confronted and overcome. And as they left the game room that night, they knew that the nightmare machine would always be waiting, eager to claim the souls of those who dared to challenge its twisted power. As the group of campers ventured deeper into the dense forest, the trees seemed to close in around them, casting eerie shadows in the fading light of day. The air was heavy with a sense of foreboding, and a palpable unease settled over the group like a damp shroud. They had heard the stories of the whispering forest, tales of lost souls and ancient spirits that haunted the woods, but they had dismissed them as mere superstitions. As night fell, the campers set up their tents and gathered around a crackling fire, seeking comfort in the warmth and light. But as the flames flickered and danced, a strange sensation crept over them, as if unseen eyes watched from the darkness beyond the trees. And then, they heard it, a soft, whispering voice that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the forest. The words were indistinct, the language foreign and ancient, but the message was clear: they were not alone. Despite their growing fear, the campers tried to brush off the unsettling experience, chalking it up to the wild imaginations of weary minds. But as the night wore on, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if beckoning them deeper into the heart of the forest. One by one, they succumbed to the lure of the mysterious voice, unable to resist the pull that seemed to bind them to its will. As they stumbled through the undergrowth, their senses heightened by fear and adrenaline, they came upon a clearing bathed in moonlight. In the center stood an ancient, gnarled tree, its twisted branches reaching towards the sky like skeletal fingers. And at its base, illuminated by a soft, ethereal glow, lay a forgotten burial ground, the graves marked by weathered stones and faded memories of lives long past. And there, in the center of the clearing, they found it, a small, ornately carved music box, its delicate melody drifting through the night like a siren's call. The campers were drawn to it, unable to resist the allure of its haunting tune, even as they sensed the darkness that clung to it like a shroud. And as they reached out to touch the box, a sudden sense of dread washed over them, as if they had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. And then, the whispers stopped, replaced by a deafening silence that seemed to echo through the forest like a mournful dirge. The campers froze, their hearts pounding in their chests, as they realized the true nature of the music box, a cursed artifact that held the souls of the lost, bound to its haunting melody for all eternity. And as the last notes of the music box faded into the night, the campers knew that they had trespassed upon forbidden ground, and that they were now at the mercy of forces beyond their understanding. The whispering forest had claimed them, body and soul, and they would never escape its dark embrace. As the sun began to set on the quiet town of Willow Grove, a sense of unease settled over the residents. The old music box had been passed down through generations, its haunting melody weaving through the cobblestone streets like a sinister whisper in the wind. No one knew where it had come from, or why it held such a powerful grip on those who dared to listen. Margot, a young woman with a penchant for antique treasures, had stumbled upon the music box at a local estate sale. Intrigued by its ornate design and eerie allure, she couldn't resist purchasing it despite the warnings of the elderly shopkeeper. As she wound the delicate key and the haunting melody filled the air, a chill ran down her spine. Night after night, Margot found herself drawn to the music box like a moth to a flame. Its bewitching tune seemed to seep into her very soul, filling her dreams with visions of darkness and despair. She became consumed by an insatiable need to uncover the truth behind the cursed music box, despite the growing sense of dread that gnawed at her every waking moment. One fateful evening, as the moon cast an eerie glow over Willow Grove, Margot made a chilling discovery. Hidden within the music box was a small compartment containing a faded photograph of a woman with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. The realization sent a shiver down her spine as she suddenly felt the weight of 1,000 tormented souls pressing down upon her fragile shoulders. As the days turned into weeks, Margot's once vibrant spirit began to wither under the oppressive weight of the music box's curse. Shadows danced at the edges of her vision, whispers echoed in her ears, and a sinister presence loomed over her every move. She knew she was running out of time, that the malevolent force within the music box was slowly tightening its grip around her fragile mind. Desperate for answers, Margot delved into the town's dark history, uncovering a tale of madness, betrayal, and unspeakable horrors. The music box had once belonged to a grieving widow who had lost her sanity to its insidious melody, forever bound to its cursed enchantment. And now, it seemed, Margot was destined to suffer the same fate. As the final notes of the music box's haunting melody echoed through the empty room, Margot's world was engulfed in darkness. The twisted smile of the woman in the photograph seemed to mock her from beyond the grave, as she was consumed by a madness that knew no bounds. In the end, all that remained was the haunting melody of the cursed music box, a chilling reminder of the price one must pay for delving too deeply into the shadows of the past. And as Willow Grove fell into eternal night, the music box played on, its cursed melody echoing through the town like a siren song, luring unsuspecting souls to their doom.